indicating the urgency of our geopolitics.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I request everyone to kindly settle down.
As the tides of the...
Everybody seated in the balcony to please come down. We've got some space here. I'd be able to see you much better up close. That's it. Everyone seated at the back, please do come forward. Can the ushers please help me with this? Please guide everybody up front. That's right. Thank you. Thank you. Much better. You can see each one of you a lot more clearer. Now that we're seated in plain sight of one another, you're making me stutter all these faces. Now, the lighting is doing justice to your handsome features now that you've come up close. So I'm stuttering a bit. Now, before we progress with the professional session proper and delve into the discussions, please allow yourself to get immersed in this visual depiction of what the professional session actually holds for all of us. Enjoy.
As the tides of the Indo-Pacific rise and fall, so too do the fortunes of the nations that depend on its wealth. This fifth and culminating plenary session of the IPRD 2024 brings to light the critical geopolitical forces shaping the future of maritime resources across this vast region. Home to island nations like Mauritius, the Indian Ocean Commission faces a delicate balance. The security of these smaller nations is tightly bound to the geopolitics of maritime resources, whether fisheries or mineral wealth. In a region increasingly dominated by external interests, how can these nations secure their waters and their futures in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape? Russia is uncomfortable with the term Indo-Pacific, apprehending that this predominantly maritime framework will, in some manner, diminish its continental presence across Eurasia. As such, it continues to prefer the older term, Asia-Pacific. Sanctions enforced against it, especially after the 2022 special military operations launched by Moscow against Ukraine, have forced Russia into the geopolitical embrace of China. This is a clear manifestation of how resources such as oil and natural gas are driving geopolitics within the Indo-Pacific. Will we see a future defined by a new axis between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, in which it will increasingly be Vladivostok and not Moscow that calls the shots? Or will wiser counsel prevail? Meanwhile, Vietnam, with its vast offshore oil and gas reserves, is navigating a complex path. Like India, it has deep and historic ties with Russia, but experiences increasing discomfort in dealing with China's aggression. While the country remains a key player in Southeast Asia's energy market, it faces new challenges: geopolitical tensions in the South China Sea, fluctuating prices, and a global shift toward renewables. Yet opportunities remain, as Vietnam's ambitions to secure its energy future are anchored in its evolving oil and natural gas strategy. Fisheries are lifelines for millions across the Indo-Pacific, and nowhere is this truer than in the Bay of Bengal. Here, fisheries-driven geopolitics have given rise to both competition and cooperation. For the 7 nations of BIMSTEC, the sustainable management of fish stocks is a question not just of economic survival, but of regional security. Underpinning all this is the debate over the continuing relevance of public international maritime law, typified by the 1982 UNCLOS, but also supplemented by a host of other critical conventions and legal norms, such as the IMO, the International Telecommunication Union, and the International Regulations for the Prevention of Collisions at Sea. While these conventions have long been the framework through which nations negotiate their maritime rights and responsibilities, as pressures mount, particularly in the Indian Ocean, the enforcement of this rules-based order is more critical than ever. How do we ensure that the seas remain open, fair, and secure for all? This session dives deep into the forces shaping the Indo-Pacific's maritime future. From the resource-rich waters of Mauritius to the strategic depths of Vietnam, from the complexities of Russia's Indo-Pacific aspirations to the fisheries of the Bay of Bengal, We face a crucial choice. Will we safeguard these resources and the laws that govern them, or will we let the tides carry us into uncertainty?
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, may I now request the moderators and speakers of this session to kindly come up on stage. We have an exceptional lineup of 5 speakers: Mr. Raj Mohabeer, Ambassador D. Bala Venkatesh Varma, Dr. NGUYEN Hung Son, Dr. P. Krishnan, and Rear Admiral Kunal Singh Rajkumar. To moderate this session, we are delighted to have Ms. Jane Chan Gitien. Ma'am, I hand over the proceedings to you.
Fantastic. You can hear me good and clear, right? Very good. Very good afternoon, one and all. Welcome back. Thank you very much, Priyasha, for the introduction. Please allow me to speak from here, because unlike the previous moderators, I think you have already heard my views on the subject matter, and technically you have witnessed, right, the limits of my competency on the theme as well. So I can't spend another 10, 15 minutes on this topic, and really because, you know, we have a rather distinguished panel with us today. So one thing to the panelists, though, earlier we heard about, you know, the thing about, you know, whether if you are in the last panel, you are the list. Let me assure you that you are not. Why? It's because when you look at a conference agenda that's 3 days long, as a speaker, sometimes when you're in the last panel, you'll be thinking like, you know, what else is there for me to say? But if you have actually looked at the agenda and you have heard all the speeches to the, in the last 2.5 days, I must say that I still want to hear them. Right, there's still gaps in terms of, you know, what we have heard about the topics. We have, as the video has nicely illustrated, right, still angles that we have not covered in the last 2.5 days. I could say that we can go on for another 3 days or 3 months or 3 years on some of these topics in terms of the depth of the discussion that we can go. But as a Singaporean, I'm going to be a very strict timekeeper. Or at least, you know, to me, that's my only role in a sense as a moderator. Why? Is because we have seen in previous panels, there's a lot of questions, right? There's still a lot of questions to be asked. And, you know, I hope that in this particular panel, we can give as much opportunity to all the participants who have spent 3 long days with us to ask the question that you have to this panel. So I'm so sorry, panelists, you know, you have the very tough job of trying to answering all the rest of the questions that, you know, has accumulated in the last 3 days. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to the speaker. Our first speaker in this panel is Mr. Raj Mohabeer. He is the officer in charge of the General Secretariat of the Indian Ocean Commission based in Mauritius. Sir, your 20 minutes start now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, Chair. And I'll start to thank Vice Admiral Chauhan for inviting me and LMF to involve the Indian Ocean Commission regularly in such a very important event for exchanging on crucial issues related to maritime security. So I'll start with my presentation. I presume, first of all, when I read the title of the presentation I was about to make, and I thought about how do I go on addressing this question. And I was wondering whether we should not be looking, first of all, to try to understand when we're talking about marine resources, what are we talking about? And I believe I have read quite a number of a long list of reports, and I think I have tried in any case to try to regroup the maritime resources into these 5 key set areas I should say, to group them as they are. And I'll go very briefly on each of them. So, oops, what did I do? put it off. Oh, sorry. Okay. So first in the first group, when we were talking about the harvesting of living aquatic resources, I think there are these 4 subgroups. And while I'll be making my presentation, I'll try to just give you a brief, very brief, very, I should say, in a very too brief manner, just mention about the key areas in which the small island states, small SIDS, small island developing states like Seychelles or like Mauritius, like Comoros, etc., where do they fit in these? What are the benefits that small island developing states, small nations are able to extract? How are they able to explore and benefit from these resources, fishing, aquaculture, mariculture, etc.? If I look at the second set of marine resources, non-living resources, these are where I would like just to mention, for example, I specifically put there marine salt. All the small island states are all surrounded by sea, but all of them import salt. I'm just trying to, get to where giving you some, to increase appetite of the points that I'll be making, just to give you where we are. So small island developing states, they're surrounded by oceans, but then they still import salt. What does it mean? And I specifically am mentioning this because I know the story of India with salt. Now, on the third group is the issue of energy. I have read a few reports where it shows, it demonstrates that, the whole world energy that you would need can be exploited from the oceans. You look at the fourth area, maritime transport, port infrastructure, shipping, etc. But here, just to give you another example, 38 of the 55 African countries are coastal or island states, but there is not one single shipping line that is owned by Africa, and the whole of the Africa and especially small island developing states, we depend on major international shipping lines. So our development strategies and whatever we want to do, it depends very much on the business plans of these shipping lanes. And then the last, I should say, set of areas of marine resources are these, specifically because, there are lots of activities that we do. And in fact, if you calculate in terms of amount of resources spent in these areas, maybe that these is more important than others. So I here come to the most important point that I'm trying to make is that small island developing states have large EZs, yet blue economy or development of blue economy, is untapped. All these resources I mentioned, how many of these are really, subject of major areas for economic activities or areas where, small island developing states are really heading on. Now, I think I saw one of the videos that was sent to us in preparation for this conference, and I saw one on fisheries, and I immediately thought maybe I should give the example of fisheries. Why fisheries? Simply because I believe that fish and fisheries resources exist before humanity, in fact. And when humanity started, we started first of our activities was fishing. But then when you look at fisheries, I heard my colleague, I think from Tanzania, mentioning about the different types of, different types of fisheries, like 50 species are being exploited. But if you take just one example, let's take tuna, for example. Tuna in the Western Indian Ocean region, you know that the value of the tuna caught without it being transformed into canned tuna or others, without it being transformed, it is estimated to something like, 10, 20, $25 billion. Who benefits from this? In 2005, I undertook a study, and that study showed very clearly that from this tuna, which is found in this region, the whole region benefits not more than 7 to 8% from the proceeds of that tuna. Not more than 7 to 8% of the proceeds of the tuna. So the question I'm asking is, when I draw the list of all the different marine resources, exploitation of these resources benefits to who? If a resource like tuna, one of the fishery resources which are abundant in our region, which are worth billions, the region is not able to make the most of the benefit from that resource. So these are some 6 questions that I'm asking. I'm not going in details of this, but just to say that, and again, here I mentioned, and it was very good that, previous speakers from Africa, I think my colleagues from Kenya and Tanzania, they mentioned about the need for a few prerequisites that are very important for us to look at before we are able to really ensure that the benefits accrue to the population and to the people of the countries. And here I would like to extend the discussion on look at all those minerals, oil and gas in the whole of Africa, and look at who are really the beneficiaries. But related to the issue of geopolitics, I would like to remind ourselves what happened, for example, when in Delgado, when one of the European companies started exploiting the gas there. It was mentioned, by the way. So what I'm trying to say is that there are enormous number, a long list of projects and programs which tries to address these prerequisites, but it's not making any difference. That's the key thing. It's not making any difference, and I believe what the most important thing for us to do is to ensure that, especially small island developing states, we are able to effectively, ensure the sovereignty of these resources, of the EEZs, by the countries. Effective sovereignty. Not that, this whole of the EEZ, Mauritius has 2.3 million square kilometers of EEZ, Seychelles has 1.3 million square kilometers of EEZ, etc. It's not just being these on paper, but able to know, because if we are not able to know exactly what is contained in our EEZs, who is doing what in our EEZ, the question is not to try to question the issue of freedom of navigation. That's not the issue. The issue is who are undertaking what actions at sea in our EEZs. We have to empower our countries so that our countries do that. For the time being, they're not doing that. And that's the key thing. And I believe that this is where we have to focus ourselves. And this is where the Indian Ocean Commission is trying to focus. At the same time, many of the issues related to geopolitics with respect to those resources, with respect to the marine resources and things will to some extent be addressed. What is that we need to do? What is that we are planning to do? We have initiated already. We have to, and the technology that exists enable us to monitor in real time the movement of all the activities at sea, especially the vessels. We have to do that. We should be able to have a clear picture of the region and the movement of and then identify abnormal movement of the vessels. This is key. And of course, there are some prerequisites to address that. Let's do those. But we should go further in trying to see, and this is where one of the questions would be, the limited resources that we're talking about in terms of naval air assets, surface assets. But by working together, this is what we're trying to, by working together, we can pool those assets together and then see to it that we, are able to, without adding to the burden of the very expensive costs of these assets, by just working together, we can address this limitations of assets, but then also ensure that there is legal finish. And I'll give you some examples of what we have done. Now, this is just to show that, we have to know exactly what's happening. It means that we should be able to address, identify the different various types of maritime security challenges that is happening in the region, but also monitor them to try to know what are the different challenges, and then produce some experts. And this is where reports from the RMFC, from IFC IOR, IFC Singapore, etc., we need to see to it that they are working together. 3 years back, I organized a meeting of the IFCs of the whole region, and they were all unanimous in saying that we would need to be working together, get a comprehensive maritime picture. And on the basis of that, in 2018, during a ministerial conference in Mauritius, there were some 2 agreements that were signed. 2 regional centers have been established. Yesterday, Jeffrey from the US mentioned about it. These are there, but what is now very important is that we see to it that at a national level, we have some national centers which are able to do the job that I was mentioning earlier in terms of the identification of all the movement of the vessels and identification of VOIs, vessels of interest, and then check abnormal movement of, check those vessels which needs to be checked. The whole setup has already been established. This is what it is. It is, and this is key. And this is where the issue of geopolitics, we don't want to look the issue of geopolitics from a negative perspective. We would like to see to it that the effective sovereignty of a country is observed, but by working together with other countries. For example, yesterday, I think it was mentioned, I think yesterday or the previous day, that, for example, what India did when there was a surge of piracies as from November last year and December. And by February, March this year, the piracy was reduced because of the permanent intervention of India in the northern Western Indian Ocean region, and hence the major threats on freedom of navigation and also threats on economies like Seychelles, where it could impact very negatively the tourism and the fishery sector. These are being taken care of by, for example, India. But then who would look at, and I mentioned about fisheries, who would look at how one country in our region would say, yes, I have given so many licenses to country X. I know exactly how much it has fished, where it has fished. And then on that basis, you can, then speak on equal terms with those major developed powers, etc. So that's what it is about. It is about empowering the countries. The whole setup is here. I won't go into the details because it will take more time. And the chair said she will be very, very severe with me. So let it be. Now this shows the area of focus for the RMFC, the Regional Maritime Information Fusion Center, to monitor the movement of the vessels in the, in the rectangle which is in red. And in the dotted rectangle, this is where actions at sea coordinating together with assets from the countries are undertaken. And you'll see, you'll find that in the table, you'll find the assets that the countries have already agreed to put at the disposal for coordinated actions at sea. And here, just to give a list of operations that we did together. And I'd like to just give you, to end, some examples of coordinated operations at sea based on vessels of interest and pooling of assets together that we have done. So, for example, this operation that was done in September 2022, I'm just taking a few to show you. this picture shows HM Montrose, which is a UK vessel. So it's not just working with assets, naval and surface assets, air assets from the region, from the countries signatories to those agreements, but also with external partners. So this one is where we tested coordination between Seychelles asset, Madagascar asset, and UK assets. And this resulted in the seizure of nearly 815 kilo of heroin, which was coming from, you know, in the northern Western Indonesian region, Afghanistan, etc. So this was caught. Now, another one, there were two, you know, there were two boats which were bringing at least 1 ton of heroin again. And these are the two on red. You can see those two vessels that were coming. Without getting into the details, the picture of the biggest seizure of heroin that has been done by Seychelles. It's not only one. They seized twice, and this amounted to 1,062 kg of pure heroin from one of the vessels. The other one vessel, now this is a picture of the vessel, another vessel, but I'll come to that one. Now that those two vessels, one country didn't, you know, was not ready to, you know, that these things that we do is highly risky. So one didn't do so. What we know from these, from the other boat, that there was also more than 1 ton of pure heroin, and it delivered, and then eventually it went away. So this is just another example of, you know, in illegal fishing that has been seized, the vessels, and it was together with the UNAFOR, and it led to something like more than 315 fishermen caught in an area which they were not supposed to be there. Now, at the same time, we also, if you look closer to it, what we took the pictures of some of the fish that were caught, including some sharks that were caught. And these sharks, when we checked, they were in the red list of CITES. So what I tried to tell you here is that the geopolitics and marine resources, it goes hand in hand, but it is very important for us, we believe, and I believe very strongly, that to address the negativities of the relationships between major powers and the geopolitics together with the marine resources, what is most important is to ensure that countries, even if they are very small nations, they're able to exert their full effective sovereignty on the EZ. By doing that, they should be able to control all the resources that are in their EZs, and eventually should be able to monitor what is happening there, whether it is gas, oil, or whatever resources they are. I end up here, Chair, and I think that I'm on time for once, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raj. Anyone else who is timekeeping will realize that I'm actually a horrible timekeeper. Very much on time. I thought the presentation earlier was another good example of how the promo videos has inspired yet another fascinating presentation. Also why, you know, I kind of kept my eye off the timekeeping. So I think, you know, I really appreciate you sharing with us a very nuanced perspective from the small island developing states, right? With a particular emphasis on the need to focus on effective sovereignty and some suggestion on how to achieving that. I thought that was particularly instructive. Thank you very much, sir, for that. Moving on to our second speaker. I think, may I invite Ambassador Varma, who is former ambassador of India to the Russian Federation and currently the Distinguished Fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation, to talk us through the topic on Russia and resource geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific. Ambassador, please.
Good afternoon, Namaskar to everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here. The second time I'm speaking at the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue, and I wish to congratulate Admiral Karambir Singh and Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan for putting up an absolutely fantastic event, and their team. They do a splendid job. To the senior officers of the Indian Navy who are present here and are supporting this dialogue, I think our deep appreciation. I've been asked quickly after the very sensible, very appealing presentation of the perspective of the small states. I have been asked to jump into the other end of the pool and give the perspective, not speaking on behalf of Russia, but speaking about Russia, which is the largest country in the world. So much as we would like to keep geopolitics out, tamed, caged, put into a box, locked up, when Russia walks into the room, a whole lot of geopolitics also walks into the room. So I am afraid I can't avoid a little bit of... So the topic that has been given to me is the following. I will address it in the perspective of 3 points: geopolitics, commodities, and connectivity. And I'll draw 5 conclusions at the end of my presentation. But what is my main argument? The intersection of geopolitics and commodities and connectivity is central to analyzing Russia and its resource geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific. It's impacting the region, definitely. It is also impacting global politics in quite unanticipated ways. Geopolitics, of course, the driving force of geopolitics, the latest trigger is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which started in its active form in February 2022. But it's not just a war between Russia and Ukraine, which is, of course, now into its 3rd year, and is slowly turning in Russia's favor. That is the situation on the battlefield. But it's more than a conflict between Russia and Ukraine in Ukraine. It is also a larger conflict between Russia and the West. And one of the primary instruments of the West, apart from supplying arms to Ukraine, is to impose very severe sanctions on Russia, more than 22,000 at last count, intended to impose on Russia such economic and punitive measures that it would change Russian war calculus, the calculations that Russians do about the war, and force Russia to the negotiating table, and force Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. While these sanctions have imposed severe economic costs on Russia, and it is quite possible will weaken Russia in the medium and long term, the sanctions themselves have been a spectacular failure in changing the essential Russian calculus about the war. What has also happened is that this has also affected Russia's own response to the schism that has now appeared between Russia and the West, which is to pivot towards Asia, pivots towards the East, as they call it. And this pivot has largely been to expand relations with China and India, but also expand relations with the Global South, with BRICS, with SCO, and other countries. The relationship between Russia and China has come up for a lot of comment. Trade between Russia and China has increased to around $250 billion, almost 100% increase in the last 2 years. Large majority of the trade is in Russia's favor because Russia exports to China. The exports are in energy, agriculture, machine tools, and things like that. And in return, Russia gets a number of commodities which are of essence to its war-fighting abilities in the Russia-Ukraine war. But there have been no arms transfers from China to Russia in this respect, though there have been some dual-use items that have been come forward. In terms of connectivity, the cutoff from the West has forced Russia to turn towards the East, for which it is better placed then turning towards the south. So remember three directions. It is cut off from the west. It means that the European market had almost completely dried up. Not fully dried up. I think it's important to remember when our European friends tell us why India is importing so much oil from Russia. We would also like to ask them, why are you still importing LNG from Russia and coal and fertilizers from Russia? So it is not completely dried up, but what is dried up is oil. So oil that we used to go to Europe is now down almost 80%. The additional oil that is available with Russia is now going to the international market, to Russia, to China, to India. India is a big beneficiary of that. Gas, which we used to go to Europe, is now not being supplied to Europe. Almost 90% has come down. This has reduced revenues for Russia to conduct its war, but it has not weakened its war effort. With respect to China, there is already Power of Siberia 1, which the Chinese benefit because there's a land border between Russia and China, which there is none between Russia and India. So while it is easy for Russia to transfer resources from the west to the east, it is more difficult for Russia to transfer resources from Russia to the south, which is to the Gulf, to India, and to the Indian Ocean area. This is further complicated by the fact that the pipelines or the shipping routes go through very contested areas. Russia is hit back against the West by improving its relations with dramatically with DPRK, with Iran, which have almost moved to a higher level of defense cooperation, which has completely upset the security calculus in the Northeast area, which is one of the core areas of the Indo-Pacific. And how does this translate into American response? America has strengthened AUKUS. It has strengthened the trilateral between the United States, Japan, and Korea. And it is looking for additional partners in the Indo-Pacific area, including Philippines. What it has also done is that it has created a heightened sense of insecurity amongst America's Asian allies, particularly Japan and Korea. And this debate that has arisen in Japan about having an Asian NATO is actually fundamentally a Japanese worry about the inadequacy of the American security commitment in the face of increased DPRK, Japan, China, Russia axis, the so-called axis that is now being. Is the Russia-China relationship an alliance? The answer is no. It is coordinated deterrence. It is coordinated political posturing. It is coordinated diplomatic posturing in BRICS and SCO at the Security Council. But it is, I don't think it is an issue that, so there are critical limits to what Russia and China can do together, but the essential glue that is putting Russia and China together is the schism that has appeared between Russia and the West. What are the key commodities that Russia is involved with, which is critical to global markets? Of course, oil, gas, and LNG are the well-known ones, but Russia also exports a lot of coal, fertilizer, other agricultural commodities of the list you saw in the morning, but also uranium, titanium, nickel, aluminum, copper, and other commodities. Now, the inability of the sanctions regime to cripple the Russian banking financial system, weakened it but not crippled it. The ability of Russia to access additional markets, the ability of Russia to use the international system despite the dominance of the dollar to find avenues, difficult though it is the current, who benefits from all? Of course, the extraordinary beneficiary of this current geopolitical flux is China in many ways. Firstly, China is able to dictate the terms of what it purchases from Russia, especially in energy, because it is one of the biggest customers for Russian energy. It is also in a position to dictate future terms, the reason why the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline between Russia through Mongolia to China is still not agreed upon because the Chinese are pressurizing Russia to offer it very substantial concessions, which is not favorable to Russia. Russia has conceded ground on the BRI. Russia used to be very skeptical about Chinese BRI, but because of its isolation from the West and its inability to take on all the big powers at the same time, it has conceded ground on the BRI. It has conceded ground on the Northern Sea route. It is also put in more emphasis on the North-South corridor, but the troubles in Iran create a new sort of choke point for Russia because it is unable to come south through Iran, through the Caspian Sea, through Central Asia. So choke points have to be understood not only in maritime terms, but they also have to be understood in Russia has also hit back against the West in Africa. There's a resource conflict that is taking place in the Sahel, partly because of the ability of the Russians to push out French influence in 3 or 4 critical African countries. So the point I'm trying to make is that this Russia-Ukraine conflict has not produced results on either side which were anticipated. It has created surprises. It has created a stalemate. And the consequences are absolutely global. It's not just regional. Of course, it has completely destroyed the foundations of European security. NATO has been expanded. European and defense budgets are going up, which of course changes the calculus of aid that comes to the sustainable development goals or the climate change goals. Russia is now almost into a war economy sort of mode. So there have been fundamental changes, despite the fact that we might head to some peace settlement at some stage during the course of the war. Both Europe, NATO, Russia, Ukraine have been fundamentally transformed. Let me end by 5 basic conclusions. The Indo-Pacific cannot be insulated. So our hope, our perception, especially from India, that we can shape a new regional construct, which we can have a rule-based international order. The coherence of the Indo-Pacific has been impacted majorly by a war that none of the Indo-Pacific powers have been involved with. We didn't start it. We are not part of it in any direct way. But the fact that the Indo-Pacific itself has been impacted. It is impacted from outside, but it is also changing from within. The task of constructing a rules-based order in the region has become more complicated. Building regional rules through plurilateral groupings during global turbulence is, of course, extraordinarily difficult, and this is one such instance and example of that. The second main conclusion. The biggest beneficiary of these trends is China, which only means that geopolitical quagmire, which is presently both the big powers, other 2 big powers find themselves, which is Russia, which is on a back foot in Ukraine, and the United States of America, which is now overextended, not just in Europe, but also in the Middle East. So the essential geopolitical triangular equation at the global level favors China, not because China has done anything extraordinarily clever to deserve this, because of the rather, I would say, strategic deficiencies of both Russian and American policies. For us in the Indo-Pacific, this has a huge impact. And we, as from India at least, we would not like to see this advantage that presently accrues to China to be an irreversible advantage. So to our European friends, our message is, we would like you to settle the Ukraine conflict as quickly as possible, re-establish European security as quickly as possible. At some stage, you will have to involve China, involve Russia, and how you do that is up to you. But your ability to play a role in the Indo-Pacific will inevitably get impacted by the continuing insecurity of Europe because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Despite your protestations, it is very clear that we will draw the necessary conclusions on your ability or your willingness to play a role in the Indo-Pacific. India's peace initiative, you would have heard Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia, thereafter to Ukraine. Thereafter, Prime Minister Modi's visit, meeting with Zelensky in New York. We've also had an opportunity for our national security advisor to travel to Moscow to meet Mr. Putin. Has to be understood against this large geopolitical background. It is in India's interest for the war to come to a conclusion as quickly as possible through peace, dialogue, and a bilateral settlement. Because we are absolutely clear in our mind that given the conduct of the war as we have seen it in the last 3 years, a full solution on the battlefield is not possible for either side. So a compromise would be necessary for this to take place. Third, the Indo-Pacific is not just maritime, because it has a very strong maritime dimension, but also its correlation with continental security. Choke points are not just maritime, but also land-related. There is also now a divergence between security dimensions of the Indo-Pacific and new economic drivers of the Indo-Pacific. India, China to a large extent, ASEAN, have very strong economic interests in the region. We've also seen a very fascinating discussion in this conference on how deep sea mining is emerging as a very large area of interest. Fourth, the changing nature of warfare. Gray zone warfare, large armed groups, ISR revolution is enabling military uses not thought possible before. I think the Houthis are a very good example of how relatively a small armed group can cause disruption of such a far-reaching nature in terms of global shipping and things like that. And why is that so? It's not just the prevalence of these armed groups, and they are not just Houthis who are just the only armed group of this nature that are there, but the protection of not only the salience of communication, but protection of the territorial boundaries, the borders of the maritime domain is also equally important. Last, let me say that, let me add a word on India-Russia relations. Russia remains a very strong strategic partner for us. We see the Indo-Pacific as an area where we don't have full agreement. Russia is very strongly against the AUKUS. It is strongly against the security alliances of the United States. It is skeptical on the Indo-Pacific construct strategy. It is also skeptical on Quad, because we have made it very clear that as far as we are concerned, it is free and open. It is open to all. The Quad or the Indo-Pacific really does not contradict any of India's other objectives that we pursue with the for us, the concern on the Russia-China relationship is a matter of concern that we wish to take up as we move forward. India's engagement with the Indo-Pacific cannot be complete without what Prime Minister Modi called in September 2019, India's Act Far East policy. This was during his visit to Vladivostok, where India reached out to Russia to create a framework of engagement which supplements the Act East policy of India. Act Far East policy, of course, because of the nature of the war, the imposition of sanctions and other disruptions in the international community, we have not been able to take it forward. But this is clearly something that we would need to take forward as we go ahead. India, the Russia-Ukraine war has created new challenges for the India-Russia relationship. But I think we've been careful enough and dedicated enough to ensure that some of these negative impacts are limited. There has been some impact, but I think to insulate the relationship, to go forward, and right from the beginning of the conflict, we have said that this is something that we would like to take forward with peace returning as quickly as possible on the battlefield. With that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Varma. Ambassador, you just beat Mr. Raj by 10 seconds. Raj ended at 1959. Ambassador, thank you very much for helping us understand Russia a little bit better. I think, by your conclusion, it has kept things real for us. Somewhat relieved to hear that the Sino-Russo relationship is not limitless, but I'm not quite sure how to feel when you alluded to in the sense that China do have some upper hand vis-a-vis Russia on certain sectors. Perhaps a bright student among us can ask you a question later on. Hint, hint. Moving on to my good friend and a senior ASEAN colleague who I look up to very, very much, Dr. Nguyen Hong San, who is Vice President of the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. Dr. San is going to talk us through Vietnam's oil and natural gas exploitation, geopolitical challenges and opportunities. San, the floor is yours. Try and see if you can beat the two preceding speakers.
Thank you very much, Jane. Well, good afternoon. At the outset, allow me to express my deep gratitude to Admiral Singh, Vice Admiral Chauhan, to National Maritime Foundations for this kind invitation for me to participate in this world-class forum. And congratulations for, now we can safely say, a very successful and very enlightening conference throughout. So allow me to apologize for sounding a little self-centric for the next 20 minutes to bring you back to the South China Sea. Because we, in Vietnam, as well as in ASEAN, we tend to think of the South China Sea as the epicenter of the Indo-Pacific. And hence, we have always proclaimed ASEAN centrality on the regional architecture. So I'm going to speak primarily about what's going on in the South China Sea, having to answer very difficult questions on Vietnam's oil and natural gas exploitation, challenges and opportunities. Right, so I'm going to address this question by answering these 4 or 5 topics. I'm going to speak first about Vietnam's oil and gas interest, obviously in the South China Sea, Vietnam's strategy to protect its interest, of course, vis-a-vis the geopolitical challenges that we face. I'm going to pin down what are the primary challenges that is arising, geopolitical challenges that's arising, as well as the opportunities that we see there are there. And I'm going to address also Vietnam's broadly foreign and defense policy in order to tackle these challenges and to reap the opportunities. Now, so Vietnam has a relatively sizable offshore hydrocarbon industries. It's not comparable to Malaysia or maybe to Indonesia, but it's still nevertheless attractive enough of honey to address the bees and the bears and the pandas to the South China Seas. Relatively speaking, it also contributes a large chunk of our GDP, maybe not as large as our neighboring countries, but also relatively large. About a quarter of our GDP used to come from the oil and gas industries. And so the importance of it to the national economy is needless to say. This is what we used to think that we own in the South China Sea. We used to think that because we own the parasols and the spratlys, those archipelagic islands can generate full exclusive economic zones, and hence it's going to generate a very broad area of exclusive economic zones in the South China Sea. And hence you can see the line there, which looks like I'm sorry to say, a pregnant woman, as it is usually referred to, very uglily. But this is wrong. This is no longer our claim. Unfortunately, the internet still remembers it. And every time anyone searches for Vietnam's claims in the South China Sea, these maps comes up. So please, ladies and gentlemen, this is misinformation. This is Vietnam claim these days. We are aligning our claims to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and we are increasingly very restrained in claiming those maritime zones under new understanding of how the law of the sea works, and given the light of the arbitrary ruling
in 2016, which gives the islands and islets in the South China Sea no more than 12 nautical miles of territorial sea. So what do we do with these claims in the South China Sea? We divide it up into blocks, and then we invite the international oil and gas industries to come in and invest. And as you can see, the blocks are very colorful, and that is because there are a number of different international companies who have come in and invest. And these are the major names of the major oil and gas companies that have come to invest in Vietnam's exclusive economic zones. And that is also part of our strategy on how we can exploit the natural richness of the South China Sea, while also maintaining a very open and wide international cooperation in the very sensitive body of water. India's ONGC, oil and gas company, is a major investor in the South China Sea and also in Vietnam's EEZ. It is licensed to operate in at least 2 blocks. One is running profitably at the moment, and one, the block 128, India ONGC, is licensed to operate in it, but it's yet to find the reserves in it. Now, in order to attract foreign investors into Vietnam's EEZs and to invest in relatively sensitive waters, we have enunciated a number of laws, especially the latest laws on oil and gas gives a lot of incentives for international investors to go in. It creates a very clear, transparent legal framework. It simplified the investment procedures, gives a lot of tax breaks for investors who go into deep water drilling or into a sensitive area or into unconventional resources like shale gas. It's also stipulated international standard dispute resolutions mechanism. So it's very competitive law to attract international investors to go in. Now, we have a maritime strategy that has been updated a couple of times. And given the emergence of renewable resources and other marine economy, blue economies, oil and gas sectors have come down in terms of priorities and importance in our maritime strategies. It is still a very important area, but its level of importance in our overall maritime strategies have gone from the first in our strategies in 2007 to now number 3 in its importance. Nevertheless, it's still a growing sector, and in our power development plan towards 2030 and towards 2045, oil and gas, especially gas, is still a very large and huge area. Now, our primary strategy to protect our national resources in the South China Sea is through legitimacy, legality, and also diplomacy. Legal means is one of the most important means that we deploy in order to protect our rights to resources in the South China Sea. One of the very prominent case of maritime delimitation was in the Gulf of Beibu, and it's surprisingly with China. And to those who believe that bilateralism with China would not work, especially with countries with asymmetric powers vis-a-vis China, that is not the case in the Beibu Gulf that we experience. In fact, the Beibu Gulf delimitation was considered by legal experts as one of the textbooks case of delimitations of maritime boundary, completely based on good international practices and based on the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And the fact that we have been able to successfully delimit the Beibu Gulf also was evident in the fact that it's now very peaceful and cooperations with China in the Beibu Gulf is very smooth, and it's very based on mutual interest. In 2009, we have also been able to achieve a joint submissions of continental shelf claims with Malaysia. It's not a delimitations of the continental shelf, but it's also a recognitions of one another submissions, and it found a very good basis for delimitation of the continental shelf. In 2002, we managed to agree with Indonesia to delimit our EEZ. That exact delimitation is not yet publicized, but we know that it's in the making and it's awaiting two countries' ratification. To this year, there was a major development in South China Sea by the submissions of extended continental shelf claims by Philippines and Vietnam in the middle part of the South China Sea, which is also forming a very good basis now that all countries that has claims there have laid their official claims to the Committee on Extended Continental Shelves in the UN. That is going to form a good legal basis for the three countries to either work out the delimitation or work out any cooperative measures based on the legal claims that they've laid. Now, there was one area in the South China Sea that was not yet, and there's no legal development, and that is with regard to the area surrounding the parasols. And it's easy to understand why, and that is because China is now occupying the parasols. Vietnam lays claim into it, and it's impossible to talk to China on anything about the limitation in this area. And precisely because of the nature of the disputes there, occasionally major incidents happen, such as the one that happened just a week ago, not more than a week ago, where several Vietnamese fishermen were bitten by steel stick to the point that 3 of them were broken, have their arm broken, 1 laid unconscious, and 7 others were severely injured. And these kind of incidents is the kind of geopolitical incidents that I'm going to talk about later. So, on to the challenges. What are the major challenges in the South China Sea with regard to geopolitics? It's an open secret that China has a notorious claim in the South China Sea. And don't get it wrong, China no longer publicly refer to the 9 or 10 dash line. They know that it's not going to survive, and it's held standing internationally. And therefore, they stopped referring publicly to the 9 dash line. They now having a new claim, and that is called by the Chinese Nan Sha Shu Dao, which is the claims based on the 4 groups of islands, or internationally it's better known as the 4 Shas claims. Basically, China considers the 4 groups of islands in the South China Sea as big islands, which are capable of generating full exclusive economic zones, and therefore, based on those claims, China almost claimed now the entirety of the South China Sea, and they are implementing it. And that is the most headache that not just Vietnam, but many other Southeast Asian countries are facing. China is obviously also laying a lot of claims in all our coastal states in the South China Sea EEZs, and that includes Vietnam's. In 2012, they openly call for bidding some of the blocks which is completely, entirely within Vietnam's exclusive economic zones. Recently, they have been showing increasing presence in the South China Sea, and they have now flooded the South China Sea with maritime militias, survey vessels, and so on and so forth. Some of the law enforcement vessels came very close to some of the operating oil rigs in the South China Sea being operated by Vietnam, also by international investors, creating a lot of concerns to the operation safety of these oil blocks. These are becoming very familiar images in the South China Sea, where China Coast Guards are very intimidatingly present everywhere in the South China Sea. Now, the gray zones operations are obviously what is challenging the most, because it's very difficult to challenge, to find the right legal basis to openly challenge gray zones operations. What you are seeing on the map is not some kind of spider webs. These are trails of China's survey vessels operating in the South China Sea. They are presence in increasing number in the South China Sea, combing the South China Sea to the extent that you see. And that is threatening the interests of not just Vietnam, but obviously all other Southeast Asian countries. But aside from this seemingly benign and civilians operations of maritime militias or survey vessels, they are increasingly using the artificial islands that they illegally built to exert and project powers very deep down the South China Sea. They're increasingly using soft weapons like water cannon and laser weapons to threaten their opponents, most predominantly the Philippines recently, but also other Western countries' presence in the region. And they've been increasingly exercising a lot of dangerous maneuvers, as we have already seen. And onto a closer look into these survey vessels, you can see that their interest is can be predominantly about searching for hydrocarbon resources, as you can see from the pattern of their maneuver in the South China Sea. But they also are increasingly interested in other business. Some of the later pattern of movement of these survey vessels indicated that they are not interested in hydrocarbon, but they are interested in mapping the deep seas, the deep sea beds, also the entrance of the deep water of South China Sea, possibly for underwater warfare or something like that. So the responses to these challenges by Vietnam has been to, well, diversify its defense diplomacy. We have been opening up our ports for naval ports visits for increasingly number of countries. And as you can see, India is a frequent port visitor of Vietnam. But you can see that an international fleet of almost all Western naval powers are frequently visiting Vietnam ports these days. And while this are not as a show of force or has no intention, but we do want to send a message to China that we are for an open Indo-Pacific, and we welcome the presence of international partners in this water. We have also enhanced our cooperations with international partners to build our capability, with especially with our naval and coast guards capability. And we are very thankful for partners like the United States and India for commissioning their frigates and to our coast guards and also to our Navy. Most recently, I think we received a frigate from the Indian Navy. We have, I think, another opportunities in the South China Sea is the cooperations on mineral extractions in the middle of the South China Sea. Now that the claims to extended continental shelves have been laid by all the claimants to that area of the seabeds, namely Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. That area in the middle of the South China Sea, which is also the high seas, is thought to be rich in minerals, and that could be an area for international corporations to for mineral exploitations and exploration. Obviously, all countries in the regions are very keen to move towards the blue economy. Offshore wind is something that has been talked a lot about. Vietnam is thought to have a huge potentials on offshore wind energy, and we are actively building a plan to exploit those resources. And this could be, and it is becoming a new area of opportunities for cooperation in the South China Sea as well. And obviously, India is also invited to consider that options for cooperation in the South China Sea as well. Now, in order to realize all those opportunities and in order to handle the challenges, the geopolitical challenges, including the closing up of relationship between China and Russia, Vietnam has been implementing a very active, proactive diplomacy, and sometimes it is called or dubbed as bamboo diplomacy. Essentially, it is a policy of diversification and of active participation in international multilateral fora. As you can see, in the past 2 years or so, Vietnam has received all the major powers to visit Hanoi, sometimes only a month apart. That sometimes is considered to be a skillful diplomatic skills by Vietnam, but I think it's just an indication that there's increasing interest by the major powers themselves into our region, and it's just like an effort, in order to be able to maneuver between these growing interests of the countries in the South China Sea and also in the ASEAN region. And I think Vietnam also continues to implement the Four No's policy, which means that we are going to refrain from allowing Vietnam as a territory to be staged against the interests of another party. We'll refrain from joining any military alliance. We'll refrain from the use of force or the threat to use of force. But there is also one particular provision that is less often talked about, which is one if. And that is to say that if our interest is severely threatened, all those four no's is going to be subject to review. And that is essentially Vietnam's diplomatic and foreign policy. So to conclude, we believe, again, that being at the epicenter of the Indo-Pacific doesn't have to be the epicenter of just trouble. You can essentially turn troubles into opportunities if you exercise enough skills in diplomacy, and also you exercise enough goodwills in order to turn those geopolitical forces into the forces of cooperation and connectivity. So once again, thank you, NMF, and I wish everyone's good health. Thank you.
Thank you, Sun. That was 20 minutes and 10 seconds. No, but thank you very much for sharing with us a Vietnamese perspective in terms of the development of the South China Sea. I think we've heard perspective from three claimants in this particular conference, three different, rather different tones. But my key takeaway in Sun's presentation really is that, you know, a country's claim can evolve over time, and Vietnam is a very good example on how it's a positive example of that evolution of one's claim, you know, can actually be better. I.e., you know, this in Vietnam's case is an alignment to international law, in particular UNCLOS. But it also highlights then to me, like, you know, whether or not, you know, China is still capable of reasonable behavior as they did when they negotiated the Beibu I delimitation with Vietnam. I fear for the worst here, but again, you know, perhaps a question to be asked later. So moving on to our fourth speaker this afternoon, we have with us Dr. P. Krishnan, who is Director of the Bay of Bengal Program at the Inter-Governmental Organization based in Chennai. Dr. Krishnan is going to talk us to fisheries-driven geopolitics within the Bay of Bengal and IMSTEC. Sir, 20 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And before starting, I thought of kind of surrendering to the chair, saying that I am not going to be in competition with my fellow speakers in keeping time. That's in a lighter vein by. And once again, thanks to NMF for having me here. And I should acknowledge, like, in the last 25 years, I should have attended dozens of conferences and then even organized many. This is the first conference running for 3 days where there is no tea break before lunch and post lunch. So maybe all the audience are also living up to your expectation, like they don't require a tea to stay awake. Yeah. So before I start, maybe I'll dare to ask to start my presentation with this question, of course, to this elite audience, like, what are the potential reasons for the wars? We have discussed almost each one of them in great length, like to protect our sovereignty, energy, minerals, water. Have you ever thought like there could be even wars on fish? Has it ever happened, or it is set to happen? I just keep you pondering on this, like, and just see, like, if I were to ask these two questions, like, which region will come to your mind first? Can a small state successfully defend its maritime claims against a mighty state opponent? And whether this saying could be right, that is, the strong will do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. So obviously, going through the deliberations that we have, possibly the South China Sea may come into your mind. But this saga has already played out in full theater, and possibly some of you or most of you will be aware of the cod wars. It's not a spelling mistake. It is not Cold War. It is cod wars. It's a fish, which was between Iceland and UK. These are a series of confrontations between Iceland and UK over the fishing rights in the North Atlantic. Possibly and arguably, this is the single largest war which was fought singularly on the cause of securing the fishing rights. And the core drive for this entire confrontation was depletion of the cod stocks in the Northern Atlantic. And both Iceland and Britain, they were acting in their own national interest and then protecting the interests of the fellow fishermen in the respective countries. And this is a typical case of David bested Goliath. So the first cod war, it was between 58 to 61, where Iceland expanded its territorial zone from 4 to 12 nautical mile, again targeting only the British trawlers, wherein after the end of the confrontation, UK acceded to this. Second cod war was between 72 to 73, where Iceland expanded further from 12 to 50 nautical mile. Again, British gave up. And third and the last one was between 75 to 76, where unilaterally Iceland extended from 50 to 200 nautical mile. This is the first ever instance, like before the UNCLOS, the boundary of 200 nautical mile was kind of claimed by a particular country. And in all these three instances, Iceland got the verdict on its side. And this is one case which is being taught, discussed in many of the war colleges, naval research institutions, because of the lessons it offers for maritime counterinsurgency, and up till the most recent conflicts that are happening in different parts of the world. And this was one fishy war, where even NATO and Organization for European Economic Commission, they were all involved in this. And this war even influenced NATO's policies. And admittedly, NATO's mediation during the cod wars shaped its future conflict resolution strategies. So this is all I'm just setting to set a case for my presentation today, which is on fisheries-driven geopolitics. So fish can also be a cause for the war. This is only to set this case. And post-UNCLOS 1982, there are many institutional mechanisms that have come to address such conflicts. Possibly all these conflicts will not play in same frequency or the scale, but yet these experiences has something for us to take, imbibe, and then scale it up and then adopt for the Indo-Pacific region. A lot has been said about South China Sea, but just to keep the momentum, maybe one slide I will keep for South China Sea. Then I will move for the Indian Ocean part. So I'm just restricting to the fisheries component of the South China Sea, not on any other territorial claims here. So this is the region where 50% of the total fishing fleet, which are operated in the world oceans, they are operating here. And this is dangerously overfished. And you can see, like, close to, based on different studies, 70 to 95% of the fish stock has depleted, taking 1950 as a base. And the catch rate has also substantially declined. And particularly the Chinese trawlers, the data that is reported by all the countries when it comes to China, only 40% of the details of the fishing details are being submitted to FAO with respect to the distant water catches. So it means 60% catch is not reported. Possibly it could be IUU, possibly. And the global IUU fishing rank index, it puts for the last few years consistently, repeatedly, China on the top. And China heavily subsidizes fishing trawlers, as we know. And the fishing vessels are also sighted far in the Eastern Indian Ocean, Western Indian Ocean, even some part of the Andamans, as we know. And the strategic implications of China research vessels in the Indian Ocean is also of kind of concern almost all the countries they expressed. So with this, I come to the topic of for this session, fisheries-driven geopolitics in the Bay of Bengal. Sorry, the piece. different, in the Bay of Bengal region. So this is the area of competence for BOBP, which I represent. It's an intergovernmental organization with India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Bangladesh as its members, and also the BIMSTEC framework. So once again, thanks to NMF for having me here. Possibly my time will start from here because I'm starting now. I just played a trick. Okay. So my presentation, I'll be dwelling on 3 parts. One, the status of fisheries in this region, and measures to break the ice through cooperation in multiple ways. What are the opportunities available? And then what is the way forward? I tried to put an illustration of a fish in a soup, but this fish does not recognize like it is in a soup. Possibly that is a situation in this region as well. We'll see how. So as I start, like few stylized facts about the fisheries in this region. The first fact is like the marine fish production in this region has been on consistent rise. Never it has seen a decrease. So it means there has been increasing fishing effort. It's an area, it's a kind of a concern again. Second is like, if you see the proportion accounted by different countries based on their economies, how the countries contribute to the total production. The blue region is of lower middle income countries. So we can see like they substantially account to this total catch. So this highlights the crucial role that these countries play in the ocean management, keeping them away if we think of any management framework that is not going to work. And particularly being lower middle income, the number of small scale fisheries are more, and they are more vulnerable to climate change. To that extent, their importance and significance is more. And the third is like in this region, the shad stock is substantially high. Shad is the fish which is caught by more than one country. So just without going to the details, each bar represents a fish and different colors represent different countries. So it's very explicit, like each fishery is caught by more than 3 or 4 countries. So to this extent, the management of fishery is a challenge. And the fourth one is like the stock assessment coverage in this region is very low. Just if you see the map that is published by FAO, the number of stocks which are scientifically studied, it is quite less in the Indian Ocean, and taken together again, it is moderate. And only 25% of the fish comes from numerically as a stock. So whatever decisions we take on management, we can assume like it is precautionary. Like we don't have adequate evidence, and this evidence is particularly weak and low in this region. And the last fact which I want to present here is like in this region, there are sub-regional fisheries complexes. That is, beyond the shad fisheries, some fishery are particularly distributed within a region. For example, Hilsa between India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, and say mackerel or mackerel between oil sardine between India and Sri Lanka, so and so like. So without we cooperate between the countries, management is going to be a challenge. And one signature fishery from this region is like tuna. And this is most vulnerable for climate change. And they are transboundary, so they migrate. So a country like Maldives, it is witnessing the movement of the entire tuna stock towards the south. And that's a country like which does not fish beyond the EEZ, like, and they are using only pole and line fishery. So the situation has put a kind of a challenge to the country to even consider diversifying different fishing methods, while pole and line fishing is the most sustainable fishing method known to the world. And globally, we can see the proportion of the red part is the proportion of overfish stock. So over a period of time, it is increasing. On the right side, you see the graph is kind of reverse. The Bay of Bengal region, here again, the extent of overfished stock is increasing. So a typical display of the outcome of tragedy of commons is kind of shaping up like. And to manage what kind of structure that we have in this region. So as all of you will be aware, like there are regional fishery bodies, and in this region, we have 5 such regional fishery bodies. There are 3 regional fishery management organizations, which are some are species specific, some are generic, and then 2 fishery advisory bodies, including one that I represent, Bay of Bengal IGO. In terms of geographical coverage, the entire Indian Ocean region is under some form of regional arrangement. But the point of concern here is like in terms of the species coverage, almost 83% of the species are not under any management regime. So it is in the interest of each of the countries which are in the rim of Bay of Bengal to take note and then act on this. Like, just with an illustration to explain how difficult it is to manage without collaboration. I'm taking a case of Carangids. It's a group of 200 species of marine fishes, and the catch trends taking three different data points, 2001, 11, and then 22. You can see in Thailand, Sri Lanka, and India, the catch has been decreasing after 2011, and Indonesia, which started its catch in 2011, has substantially contributed to the total catch of Carangids. So how can a country, without factoring other countries' contribution, even manage like what's happening to its stock? Like, so there is an urgent need for collaboration here. And last, to conclude with the kind of significance of this region, Bay of Bengal. So this is the region that is overall in the Indian Ocean, the number of fishing, the countries which are fishing, it has increased from 34 in 1950 to 48 in 2021. And if you see the area contribution, Bay of Bengal in terms of area, it is just 5% of the Indian Ocean, whereas it accounts for 40% of the Indian Ocean catch and 80%, almost 70 to 80% of the Eastern Indian Ocean catch. Like, and out of the top 25 countries which are contributing to marine capture production globally, 6 are bordering the Bay of Bengal large marine ecosystem. So this speaks volumes about the kind of high productivity, intense interest among the countries, and the need for managing this. Like, so why it happens? The challenge is like lack of interdependency. I'm not arguing for dependency on another country, but lack of mutually beneficial interdependencies among the countries is possibly a reason for not operationalization of the collaborative resource management. We'll just take 2 cases with respect to trade and research. Trade creates stakes in each other's production systems. So if you see the production, trade, the extent of trade that's happening in EU, intra-EU, the European Union, it is almost 31 billion trade, and extra-EU is 32 billion, almost same. And if you see the growth rate within the EU region, the rate of increase in trade is higher than what's happening outside. Whereas it is just opposite in case of in this region. In this entire graph, it's plotted against each of the countries in the Bay of Bengal, and the last column is like trade outside the region. So it is trade volume in million USD. So within the region, between Bangladesh and India, between Indonesia and Malaysia, all this trade is very, very less. So this is something that countries should mutually strive to balance it. Like, and there has to be incentive for cooperation in terms of mutually helping in global sustainability levels, achieving the global sustainability levels, and helping each other in traceability, post-EU regulation on EU fishing, and certain regulations in compliance, like turtle exclusion device, when US says like every vessel should have. So one country may have higher competency and then the other less. Like, so that's where actually there should be cooperation, there should be mutual dependence. So as I again said, like within this region, BIMSTEC region, the trade is very weak. And the second, the collaboration among the research exchanging their labs in this region. So it's just a beginning. So every country possibly may have to try their own way, and then whatever frameworks are there, we may have to push in. So this collaboration has to be made stronger. And before I close, one last example in terms of international collaboration in fisheries management. I'm sure like many of you will be aware of the research vessel Nansen. This is the only research vessel which flies with the UN flag in the world. And this vessel, which is funded by Norway, is operated by FAO. It does the fisheries resource assessment for the entire African coast and then some islands in Bay of Bengal. So there are almost 30 plus countries who are members of this lake. So there is a need for instituting a Nansen type coordinated program for the Asia Pacific. And even this Nansen vessel which comes to Bay of Bengal, it cannot come to the coastal waters. And coastal waters are the places where large number of fishes are caught. So this is a huge gap. Collaborative research is possible, collaborative surveys to be done. And India in this context has a particular role to play and then lead. And it has one of the globally one of the largest research network in terms of institutions and then frameworks. And within the Bay of Bengal region, the top publisher, the top investor of research is India. And interestingly, in this region, the country which has the largest number of research vessels, it is 30 plus research vessels. Rest of the countries put together, it is less than 10 actually. So there is a huge scope of doing collaborative surveys, which will build trust, data sharing, and operationalizing the entire fisheries management in the region. And if we see the amount of money that India contributes to the international bodies in terms of country contributions, it is almost 26 billion Indian rupees, that is approximately $300 million. My point of putting this, this is from the latest budget statement. Like my point of showing this slide here is like when there is cooperation, India invests in various international agencies. The amount from fisheries department or the fisheries ministry is the lowest. It is kind of almost in Indian rupees, it is only 2 crores. So this talks volumes. Like when fisheries is at stake, when fisheries issues are at the major stake, there has to be cooperation, collaboration in the region, and then strategically increasing the engagement with regional and international bodies concerning fisheries is important to strengthen influence with the neighboring countries. So last to conclude, the parties need to have similar and collective views on what constitutes a sustainable resource management. So for this, collaboration is key. And despite post-UNCLOS progress, international laws are not entirely adequate to resolve geopolitical resource conflicts. There has to be understanding among the people, institutions, and all that. Laws alone cannot settle conflicts. So this is where actually, again, collaboration at every level is important. And effective science diplomacy and taking a long-term view may aid in preventing conflicts, that is through these collaborations, especially in the areas where it is still in the realm of possibility. So far, there is no conflict, but still we can prevent through collaborative surveys and then resource assessments. So in this situation, India has a potential role and opportunity to play a leadership role and then steer this entire space, which is in total alignment with the stated policy Sagar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krishnan, for the very important presentation in terms of reminding us just how dire the situation is when it comes to fishery management. Indeed, you went past the time limit, but I have, by good authority, the boss says that we can let you finish. So that's my excuse for my incompetency as a timekeeper. No, sir. I think the suggestion, your proposal in the end for more marine scientific research collaboration amongst the scientists is a very important one. But I do have, a case studies to share with you, and that is in the South China Sea. I think Sun and my Southeast Asian colleagues will remember that, in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000, our big neighbor, Indonesia, championed a South China Sea technical working group. That's what it's called, right? For decades. Yeah. So what it entails then is that indeed scientists from all claimants and interested stakeholders will do scientific research in the South China Sea. They will go out to sea, and it includes Taiwanese scientists as well. But what happened eventually, I think the history tells us that, politics took over. And as my understanding is that Indonesia is still trying to keep that technical working group alive. There are still some meetings. Unfortunately, I know for more than a decade now, there have not been any field trips out. And I think our Taiwanese friends has also been dropped from that particular process. So something to learn from in terms of what not to do, so that, your initiative, will be one that we can look to in the future. Now, moving on to our final speaker in this panel. Rear Admiral Kuna Rajkumar is actually going to speak to us on one of my favorite topics, actually, on UNCLOS and the rule of law in the Indian Ocean. Rear Admiral Rajkumar is actually currently the flag officer for doctrine and concepts in the Indian Navy. So your 20 minutes starts now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Good afternoon, sirs, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank NMF, Admiral Chauhan, Admiral KV Singh, for this wonderful opportunity to be here. I think I've been learning a lot. It's been an invigorating session. My fellow flag officers are telling I've just been copiously making notes because there is so much to learn. So I'm the last speaker, and I'm acutely aware that I am the irritant between you and the weekend that remains. So I'll have to keep telling the control because I think I'm not able to click from here. So this is the scope of my presentation, but let me make it very clear. I'm not a maritime law expert. I have no doctorate. I basically come from a accumulated, modest, humble experience over the years. So, and moreover, I've realized that over the last 3 days, whatever had to be said has been said. In fact, there were a few things I was going to cover today, but they've also been covered here as well. So much of my presentation will be a reinforcement, recapitulating, and something that comes from personal experience. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And just keep clicking. Yeah, one more. I don't have the controls here, but we were discussing where do the navies go when there's geopolitics. And I know, many of the people in Whites know, those who have served as well will know, that navies will deploy where there is national maritime interest. And Admiral Chauhan, the day before, had said very clearly, and it came out very well, that navies will act in accordance with the nation's foreign policy. And foreign policies are inevitably connected with geopolitics. Yeah, got it. Okay. The next one, please. And if you look at this slide, if you want to maintain political stability, you want to maintain free flow of oil, you want security from bellicosity, you click the next slide, please, you will have a superpower presence as well. And this comes from the need to protect oil and to provide security in the region. If you have pirates, next slide, please. Just keep clicking it here. And if you have pirates, again, the rule of the law dictates the navies to be present. And these are the two photographs on the left-hand side is Kolkata, March. Oh, I've got the date wrong. March of this year, where MP Ruin was rescued from 35 pirates, and you've got Tabar's action over there. And if the matter continues to fester, you've got the combined maritime forces. We heard about Operation Atlanta. We heard about Operation Aspides. It's all about preserving the rule of law. Next slide, please. So during the Chaupal Pe Charcha session on day 1, the rules-based international order was extensively cited by the distinguished guests. And of particular resonance in the IPRD is Prime Minister Modi's statement in Shangri-La Dialogue, 1st of June 2018, which is on the screen, and I quote, "We must believe that our common prosperity and security requires us to evolve through dialogue a common rules-based order for the region." Now, the enticing conclusive words of Thucydides, which Dr. Krishnan just quoted, I have in my script as well, that the strong do what they have to and the weak accept what they have to accept. may not be an absolute truth. It certainly rings a bell. Hard power is important, smart power, soft power, everything is important. This really rings a bell, but it's probably not the absolute immutable truth, and that's a good thing. Next slide, please. You know, as a man in uniform, there is something that all of us, I think, without question would agree, and that is the fundamental importance of the rules of the road. You can't function without them because your very safety depends on it. But we've noted that when adversaries meet at sea, these rules give way to aggression, typically manifesting in unsafe maneuvers, close passes, to intimidate and gain some kind of a psychological ascendancy. That's patently dangerous, and I will come to that a little later as well. Next slide, please. We are also aware of the vital role of the body of law, known as the law of armed conflict. We all study it in our professional military education. These laws aim to impose limits on the means and methods of war to avoid unnecessary suffering. And the point is that you don't fight a just war or conduct yourself justly during war. But if you don't do that, you're very likely sowing the seeds for another war. And while doing all this, I went back in time. Next slide, please. And I knew for one that our own mythology, our own epics, our own culture talks a lot about the wall of the laws of war as well. And General Chauhan, in the session before lunch, was also speaking about it in a different manner. And Mahabharata presents the ideal of Dharma Yudh, fighting according to Dharma, a fair or a just war, which is known as jus in bello. Next slide, please. And it specifies which weapons are prohibited, details when and where one cannot fight, prescribing that if an opponent is disadvantaged in any way, a warrior must refrain from attacking him. And some of the examples are there. What I found very interesting was that Mahabharata begins with the establishment of noble rules of Dharma Yudh, but also destruction and violation of these rules. And in the next slide, you will see on the 13th day of Mahabharata, Karna kills Arjun's son by treachery. That is Abhimanyu. And then, the next slide, please. On the 17th day, Arjuna kills Karna. And you see Karna there, his chariot wheel is stuck. And he is telling Arjun, listen, you're going against the laws of war. You can't fight me because I'm extracting my wheel which is stuck. And Lord Krishna, the God himself, is telling, listen, Arjun, you've got to remember what he did. And Karna was therefore killed by Arjun. Now, this is insofar as mythology is concerned. Let's have some good examples of law in the modern times. One where the bigger power heeded to the international ruling and ushered in a great example. And I'm speaking of the International Maritime, next slide please, of the International Maritime Dispute Resolution in Australia versus Timor-Leste, which is the Conciliation Treaty, and the arbitration between India and Bangladesh in 2014, where the ruling was in the favor of Timor-Leste and Bangladesh. And very recently, next slide please, the return of the Chagos archipelago back to Mauritius by the UK. There's much more to be done. It just came up on 3rd of October. Next slide, please. Now imagine, just keep clicking. Now imagine an alternative scenario where India or Australia's official spokesperson, in response to the judgment, if it was unfavorable, said something like the arbitration is essentially a political circus dressed up as a legal action. Or a senior ranking government minister stated something like the tribunal's judgment is worth a trash of paper. So the world is a better place when India and Australia accepted the judgment and UK returned the Chagos to Mauritius. So while there have been pleasant experiences with China, much of my strain of talk would be the unpleasant part of China. Next slide, please. And within the context of UNCLOS, which has been called as the mother of conventions, today morning it was spoken of, it is the constitution for the seas. It's fundamental to maritime security, seaborne trade, peace and progress. And to be fair, we have different interpretations in the regime of UNCLOS. Let me amplify. Many coastal states do not agree with the freedoms, rights, privileges in maritime scientific research, military maneuvers in the EEZ, transit passages with other nations. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. So now here you have the USS John Paul Jones doing freedom of navigation operations. It created quite a stir for some time. And the US itself hasn't signed the UNCLOS. But that doesn't mean that the two nations are, totally at ill will with each other. There is fundamental understanding that the UNCLOS is inviolable. We learn to adjust, accommodate, accept the differences in our interpretations, agree to disagree, and we will try and solve this problem later on. But when we examine the case of China, we see the appropriation of a whole swath of islands, dubious historical precedents as reasons to claim. And as we have discussed in the IPRD, UNCLOS does not grant signatories the right to make claims based on historical legacy. Next slide, please. And this is a satellite photograph of the Fiery Cross Reef, and you can see the kind of military infrastructure that's been built in over there. Next slide, please. The Maritime Traffic Safety Law of China was originally brought out in 83, revised in 21, and it applies China's domestic law enforcement authority to sea areas within the jurisdiction of the People's Republic of China, requiring ships of 5 types of cargoes to provide detailed information to Chinese authorities. And this has been seen as Beijing's attempt to establish its jurisdiction over South China. They've not defined what territorial sea clearly is. There are terms like jurisdictional waters, adjacent waters. So one of the nice papers I read, this is like international maritime law with Chinese characteristics. Next slide, please. I come to a point as a naval officer, it's a slight departure from UNCLOS, but that is about sea manners. And this relates to the rules of the road that I discussed earlier. So we have what is called the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea when warships meet as unscheduled rendezvous or RVs, how you're supposed to behave with each other and not cause any kind of an unsafe situation. And no one would disagree with keeping safe distances with each other, from each other during deployments. But it is disconcerting to note the instances of close passes, unsafe maneuvers, as was mentioned, lasing, shaft deployment, and harassments of ships by China in particular. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We've been told about the ramming tactics used by the Chinese Coast Guard. On the left-hand side is Pakistan Navy's Babur, which passed dangerously close to Godavari and brushed it alongside. We were even explained by Mr. Castro that ramming was an act of war in the years gone by. Unacceptable behavior. The point is military personnel know how to give it back. And in that heat of the moment, things can go wrong. We need to call out this bad behavior. Next slide, please. We need to call out this bad behavior publicly. Much of this I've got is from the net because the US put it out, other nations have put it out, Philippines has put it out. And navies are well advised to video record with a timestamp. Make sure that repeat offenders are nudged towards responsible behavior. I have no hesitation to say that it is not just China, but also Pakistan Navy, whose behavior at sea, especially in their exclusive economic zone, has been egregious. Next slide, please. Another area where UNCLOS and maritime law in general has to strengthen is the unmanned systems. We have seen their proliferation in all shapes and sizes in all domains, land, sea, and air. In January this year, we had a one-way, next slide. In January this year, we had a one-way UCAV damaging a merchant ship called Pacific Gold at the bottom half of the screen. Off the port of Kochi, it was calculated to have flown approximately or around 1,500 nautical miles to reach the point of detonation. There are a few aspects that I wish to highlight. One is the taxonomy. The number of names and descriptions that these are going around with is phenomenal. We need to formalize them, regularize them, and use those names. Secondly, when navies operate unmanned systems, my view is that we need some level of transparency, especially in common areas of deployment, in areas of heightened tensions and conflict zones, which I did see in my previous appointment. And in these areas, the ships that are deployed have a heightened level of concern about anything that is approaching them. Because an approaching vessel must be assessed as whether it is a threat or not, whether it's in air or in the surface. And that's a crucial decision-making point for the captain. Let's be clear, anything that approaches a warship with a zero closest point of approach, that is directly heading for you, is to be considered as hostile intent. It is therefore likely to be shot down as well. And as I brought out before, in certain conflict zones, we have UAVs from friendly nations that have approached our ships to close distances, and that can lead to a misunderstanding. We have on the screen now the incident of USS Vincennes, which shot down the Iran Air Flight 655 on 3rd of July 1988, mistaking it to be an Iranian F-14 fighter. And these mistakes happen in the fog of war, when you're making split-second decisions, when you're worried about what's going on around you, or the heightened tensions. And imagine the error made in the misidentification of a manned aircraft or as an unmanned aircraft, and you bring it down. Hence, next slide, please. Discussions in forums like IONS and various multilateral and bilateral meetings and exercises, navies should work towards standard operating procedures, building them up, making them more robust, and exchanging information about unmanned systems, which again came out in the presentation today, how important it is to exchange information, have better maritime domain awareness, and avoid the risks of misidentification. So unmanned systems, I believe, is one area where UNCLOS is a little thin. Whether we need an addendum in UNCLOS to UNCLOS on provisions related to exploitation and operation of unmanned systems. And in 1973, you know, when UNCLOS deliberations began, there was a movie called Westworld, based on the novel by late Michael Crichton. And it was about an android that malfunctioned and began killing visitors. Today, we are actually worried about that with sentient autonomous AI. In 1982, when UNCLOS was signed, no one knew about the Internet of Things. And today we have them weaponized to devastating effect. So UNCLOS mentions in Article 20 underwater vehicles. It just about covers that much. I feel it's inadequate. It also does not consider a concept where the ship can be without a crew. There's continuous reference of a ship with a crew at all times. Of course, there are papers stating no, remotely piloted vehicles, in that manner, there is a crew. But what about autonomous vehicles? So there are many other questions like what are the rights of unmanned vessels during transit passage, innocent passage, passage through archipelagic sea lanes. In sum, to be able to conceive of ships without a crew is an important aspect. Next slide, please. Submarine cables, enough has been discussed in the IPRD, and rightfully so. We've all heard about this. The cloud is actually on the seabed. Over 99% of global communication traffic, as the slide shows, is carried on submarine cables. And as per an article, India is fairly resilient in case one or two telecommunication cable disruptions occur. But if three of them were to take place, nearly 70% of traffic to and from India would be lost. UNCLOS mentions submarine cables insofar as the protection is concerned and extending freedom to lay and operate them. However, I feel that there is a need to declare submarine cables as a critical global information infrastructure. And when I did the thesis in NDC, I felt, why can't it come in the preamble? Probably that will give it a great amount of importance that it deserves. So I come to the last part of my brief. As I told you, I'd written a thesis, and I was astounded by the sensitivity, complexity of the ocean health systems. It remains with me today. Next slide, please. The pollution at sea, noise, light, thermal, and radioactive, it just completely unravels what's going on beneath the waters. No, go back, please. So it says, ocean exploration-related noise due to seismic guns or dynamites disrupts the social life fabric of whales and desertion of these areas by them. Thermal energy from industrial waste, power plants, or release of cold water from reservoir into waters can lead to death of marine life due to thermal shock. Next slide, please. And the Smithsonian magazine says scientists are only beginning to understand how light affects underwater ecosystems, and they'll need a lot more research to figure out what to do with it. If you look at low frequency sonars, we require them for submarine detection, but they're also harmful for marine mammals. The good news is there is growing amount of accountability and awareness. And as the slide shows, the US Navy National Environmental Policy studies the impact of low frequency transmissions. It's a 290-page book. I was reading it mostly because I was coming here to talk, but it is a lot of research into what sonars can do or not do. Likewise, the Indian Navy too mandates that all contracted work in the Navy must have a health, safety, and environment plan. So it's coming into our system, it's coming into our protocols, and that's a great thing. Next slide, please. So we are aware about, I think I'm just dot on time. The good news is that we've adopted the High Seas Treaty on 19th of June 2023. And you've all heard about the BBNJ. It's been talked about. It complements the UNCLOS. It does a lot of good work on the high seas beyond 200 nautical miles. Next slide, please. It's up for signatures on 2024. And you see the bottom right-hand corner, the ratification is at about 13. It's still got to go up to 60 for it to be adopted. Next slide, please. And we've signed it on 25th of September. You're all aware that it also covers aspects of marine genetic resources, capacity building, transfer of marine technologies, and to support the US Sustainable Goals 14, which is life below water. We discussed all of this in IPRD, so it's more like a recall. This is what the Indian Navy's green initiatives are. We are going ahead with it very, very seriously. Development of eco-friendly marine bioremedial agents to combat oil spills. In collaboration with the very famous Indian Institute of Science, there's been a development of a 100 kilowatt AC plant based on carbon dioxide. We are utilizing hydrogen as a potential source of fuel with trials of hydrogen aspirated diesel engine. Indigenous make and patented device for reducing diesel engine exhaust emissions. Expand the use of biofuels, commissioning of solar panels, all across the naval bases. There's a lot of work going on. So in the end, these are the general key points that I thought I'd cover, which I have done. From my perspective, I think much of them have already been covered. There is one point that I brought out a little different, was about the sea manners part of it and the rules of the road. I think these are terribly important for the navies to comply with in order to avoid incidents at sea. So thank you so much. And I love that quote.
Thank you very much, Admiral Rajkumar, for sharing with us, first and foremost, a practitioner perspective, right, on the interpretation and application of international law, particularly inspired by the Indian Navy Green Initiative. I think that's something that, all navies should be looking at. But also, apart from, you highlighting what were some of the key points of your presentation, I thought, you highlighted two areas where, in the academic realm, it's right now being discussed quite a lot in terms of, the required amendments to the law of armed conflict. I think you would have seen, I'm sure, the Newport Manual on the laws of armed conflict and how that is currently being debated within the academic realm. And for the students around here, I recommend you download the Newport Manual to look at, what are some of the academics advocating in terms of what needs to change in terms of the laws of armed conflict. And the other thing is on the unmanned systems, right? Unmanned systems and unmanned and autonomous vessels. For a while, we kept thinking that IMO has been leading the charge in terms of thinking about autonomous vessels for commercial vessels, right? But my understanding, and I'm sure there are experts here who knows that, IMO has postponed the date for the conclusion of that discussion by quite a few years. So in that sense, whether, the U.S. Commander's Handbook's amendment a couple of years back in terms of sharing, the U.S. views on how they classify unmanned systems and unmanned vessels is something for some of us to look at as well. So with that, I will open the floor for question and answer. Sir, how much time do we have? Because we did start a bit earlier and my math is really, really bad. So I'll look to you to give me this sign. So until then, I will try my best to take as many questions as I can, and I'll take them in groups. A quick reminder that please, briefly introduce yourself, keep your questions and remarks brief, and do identify who you want to direct the questions to. A young gentleman up in the middle first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mahesh Naidu from Hyderabad. and I'm currently pursuing my Master's in Diplomacy, Law and Business from OP Jindal Global University. And my question is to Ambassador Venkatesh, sir. How does Russia view India's role in Indo-Pacific?
Thank you. Can I have this young lady, please? Yes.
Hello everyone, myself Surat Gupta. I'm pursuing BA Honours from Political Science from the University. I have a question from the speaker of the Vietnam. How can Vietnam participation in ASEAN Economic Forum and US energy dialogues help attract international investment into its oil and gas sector while mitigating geopolitical risk?
Thank you. Sir, right at the, can we have a mic to the other side, please?
Good afternoon. I'm Captain Gurdeep Bala. I'm the officer in charge of the Indian Navy's Training Unit for Communication, Electronic Warfare and Network-Centric Operations. My question is to the other officer in charge on the panel, Mr. Raj Mohabeer. So you brought out small islands, EZ challenges. That's been the flavor, whether it's the West Pacific or the West Indian Ocean region. Coastal states with disproportionate EZs and inadequate capacity and capability. The Indian Navy, on its part, has bolstered many of these maritime agencies with ships, patrol ships, aircraft. There's a lot of joint EZ patrolling that happens with Indian Navy ships. Our aircraft, even uncrewed systems, patrol there. The ships are even repaired and refitted in India. In a given year, the Indian Navy trains over 1,000 international trainees, most from Africa. And that's just the Navy, not the Air Force and the Army. We are helping setting up coastal radar chains. There's white shipping information exchange. ILO is coming to India. The Indian government, through its Exim Bank, has been lending lines of credit. All this is happening, and with Sagar, more will happen. What then, sir, do you recommend as other lines of effort to A, India, and B, to the African leaders? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back to the panel and take this question.
Yeah. Russia's position on the Indo-Pacific. You see, we have a particular position on the Indo-Pacific. Other countries also have their own perception of the Indo-Pacific. ASEAN, for instance, has an Indo-Pacific policy initiative. Japan and the United States have their own versions. Russia's position is that it is not convinced to the need for a new terminology for this region. It would rather prefer to deal with the old terminology, which is Asia Pacific, and the old institutions of the Asia Pacific, which is ASEAN Regional Forum, East Asia Summit, ADMM plus issues on which Russia already participates. Russia has supported, in fact, India's position on the Indo-Pacific. They have specifically fully supported Prime Minister Modi's speech at the Shangri-La conference, where our principles of the Indo-Pacific have been laid out. They have also supported the ASEAN paper on the Indo-Pacific. What have they not supported? They have not supported the American or the Japanese position on the Indo-Pacific because they think there is a very strong militaristic element in that. So if you want me to summarize the Russian position, they are skeptical. They are not very happy. They are an old classical power. Also because they are rather weak in this particular area. You know, other countries are far more powerful. Number two, they don't mind India and ASEAN positions, but they are definitely against the Japanese, Australian, or the American positions on Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific, from the American point of view, the Indo-Pacific Command, the military command is named the Indo-Pacific Command. So there is a very strong military dimension to it. They may or may not be exactly right. I mean, I'm not justifying the Russian approach. I'm only trying to explain what the Russian approach is. So that is where it stands.
To answer your questions about the benefits that ASEAN memberships have brought to us with regard to protecting our resources interest in the South China Sea. I would say that ASEAN has been tremendously helpful, maybe not directly in protecting each and every individual projects that we have in the South China Sea with regard to oil and gas, but more on creating the kind of environment and protecting the principles of international law, protecting the norms, international norms that is so essential in protecting not just Vietnam, but every ASEAN member state's interests given to them by international law. Now, ASEAN also created the kind of platforms it needs, ASEAN needs, and ASEAN member states needs to enhance cooperations with its partners. And ASEAN-US cooperations on energy is one of those platforms created and brought about by ASEAN to help ASEAN member states enhance energy cooperation with its partners. With regard to ASEAN-US energy cooperation, I believe the US now is interested in moving away from oil and more into the cleaner energy. And so I think that is that kind of partnership is going to be helpful for ASEAN's to develop its resources, gas resources, LNG, for example. So that cooperation, I think, is going to help ASEAN with building capacity to adopt to more clean energy, build the infrastructure, and also build the capability so it can exploit the cleaner type of energies that it has in the South China Sea.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, no, in no way in my intervention I was trying to say, but you know, that there is not enough of support by India or other partners, by the way. The support is tremendous. But what I'm trying to say is that focusing on the resources, marine resources that we have, and I took the example of, for example, fisheries. We know that there are technology that is available. And if there is qualified people working in national information centers, you're able to know, and there are laws on which we have been working at the IOC, that the countries now, when they give licenses, the licensees are compelled to keep their VMSs on. In other words, which means that when there are vessels fishing, you should be able to know where they are fishing, what they are fishing, what amount they are fishing. Now, this system has been put on 20 years ago, not today, 2005. There is even a regional VMS system since February 2014, 10 years ago. But I'm telling you, you go and ask any country, give me just a table for 1 day of the licenses that were given, where they are fishing, what they have fished, and how much. You won't get. What I'm trying to say is that there are some missing gaps in terms of technology availability, in terms of the skilled know-how persons at national level. And this is where my focus was, but we have to sit with, at the end of the day, these small nations, they are able in their countries with their own resources, but they are able to do that. And we have to incapacitate them because I have seen those technologies exist. In fact, before developing the whole, establishing the two centers, I went to No Foods when at that time UK was part of the EU. And I can see, and they showed me, that there are at least a dozen foreign vessels in not the EEZ of a country, but in the maritime territory of a country, and there for several months. But that country was not seeing it. And I was a bit surprised. How come that? So this is where I'm going to. So in more specific terms as to what needs to be done is to, the technology that exists for monitoring of vessels, it exists. But unfortunately, these are in the hands of a few and not really democratized in terms of accessibility and provided to the countries. That is one. There are several tools and mechanisms for MDA, which are either in the hands of the private sector or in developed countries or countries which have those technologies but are not accessible to those small states, most of the Western Indian countries, for example. So these need to be made available. The other point which is important also is that we do not have adequate know-how and qualified people to man those systems. And I'm sorry to say, but the reality of the ground is that many of the countries have coast guards and navies. But at the end of the day, when you look at all the different functions and role and responsibilities of the navies and the coast guards, and you cross-check and see what are the precise contributions and their performances, you'll be surprised. At the end of the day, you ask also whether these investments, which are much more focused on vessels, on those things that cost a lot, they in fact are not of much of use. So to go to beyond marine resources, for example, and be more specific as well, as I showed that there are joint operations, coordinated operations. So for example, India could put at the disposal your navies to help in curbing down. We know very much that there is the traffic of drugs, and we know the routes, so we can focus the technology towards the movement of the vessels in particular areas, identify them, and then work together. For example, we could have another example is that we could have avoided Wakashuno. It's so simple. And we are working on it, trying to see to it how come the countries do not have a vessel traffic monitoring system. All of these countries, none of the countries in the Western Indian Ocean have that. They have small bits and pieces, but not really one which will enable them to look at the movement of all the vessels in the area. So these are the kind of things we can think of and really go at the end of the day to be seeing that these supports that are being provided and the actions that are being undertaken, they are really making a difference at the end of the day on curbing each of the different components of the maritime security, whether it is marine pollution, whether it is drug trafficking, whether it is human trafficking or other things, and we can do that. Are you fishing, etc. So I can go on and on, but
thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be more questions for you later on. I'll invite a second round of questions. Tokushi-sensei, please.
Jay, thank you. My name is Hideshi Tokuchi. I'm working for the independent think tank Research Institute for Peace and Security in Tokyo. My question is addressed to Admiral Raj Kumar. Thank you very much for a great talk. And my question is about the principle of the rule of law. What is exactly the rule of law? Because that principle is the core of the rules-based international order. And the Quad leaders, for example, are jointly committed to the enhancement of the rules-based international order built upon the principle of the rule of law. But the principle of the rule of law is not necessarily international legal term. It is originally Anglo-American domestic legal principle. So how is it? What is it in international legal terms? And what is the difference between that principle in our terminology and that with Chinese characteristics? Because China also sometimes advocate the principle of the rule of law, but sometimes not. So I'd like to have your views about that.
Thank you, Sensei. For young lady up there.
Good afternoon. I'm Anushka Jain from, I'm pursuing BA Honors, Political Science in Late Shriram College. And my question is directed to the Ambassador Varma. You said that the Russia-China ties are a result of the schism between Russia and the West. So, how will this closeness impact the relations between India and Russia? And are these changes permanent? And secondly, as a result of this closeness, will there be any unexpected adverse effects on Russia? So that's
Thank you. This gentleman up front here.
I'm Captain K.K. Sharma, Naval Veteran. So thank you, panelists, for your insightful talks. I'd like to address the Ambassador, Mr. Bala Varma. Considering China's malicious activities in the South China Sea, I'd like to know your thoughts on potential solutions. Initially, we find Chinese fishermen who remain at the forefront, followed by naval and military movements under the pretext of protection to these fishermen, revealing a larger sinister plan. I'm sure diplomatic channels are likely exploring the solutions, but what options could throw up? After hearing Dr. Sun's perspective from Vietnam, I now firmly believe it's time for a decisive action, else it may be too late. Your thoughts, please, Ambassador. Thank you.
I'll take one more question. The young lady up front.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Varma, and I'm from Center for Air Power Studies. My question is specifically to Dr. Hoon Sam. How Vietnam's oil and gas exploitation potentially align with its broader strategy for regional economic growth, particularly as a part of the BRI and regional free trade agreements like Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Yeah, thank you.
So we have 4 questions already. Perhaps we'll go to the Rear Admiral first because the ambassador had 2 questions. So we'll give him more time.
Thank you, Professor, for your question. I must say, you know the answer already for the question that you've asked me. But insofar as the rule of law is concerned, I think it's quite clear to me that when you look at the UN Charter for Human Rights, you look at UNCLOS, you look at the law of armed conflict, all of which would be brought out today, are principally the basis of the rule of law. So to that context, I would say, if you look at the Chinese characteristics, yes, I'd agree in a number of places, China has sorted out its problems, its maritime delimitations, its boundary disputes with other countries. But when it comes to UNCLOS and the kind of appropriation of the sea spaces, that is not acceptable. And that's the point that is being pushed against. So that's what is my specific intervention related to the rule of law with respect to China and UNCLOS.
Thank you, Admiral. I'll go to Dr. Nguyen first because perhaps, Dr. Sun will have some perspective that the ambassador might want to comment on as well on your second question. Sun, please.
Well, thank you. How does Vietnam oil and gas strategy align with our broader economic strategy? Now, the overall strategy, as you probably can tell, is that of diversification in the oil and gas sector, as well as in the broader economic strategy. Our primary strategy is to diversify, not to create too much dependency on any partner. Another piece of our strategy is also interdependency. Unlike probably an emerging thinking elsewhere in the world of decoupling, de-risking, or delinking, much of the thinking I believe, in my part of in Southeast Asia and maybe in the broader Indo-Pacific, we still believe in the interdependency. We still believe in the pacifying effect of creating mutual dependencies between economies. And that is still primarily the underpinning idea behind Vietnam's broader economic strategy. And so what would that impact our participation in the BRI as well as in RCEP? I think that is going to encourage us to consider participating in those arrangements. But that is also asking us to also consider other arrangements. And the fact is that we have been participating in a lot of free trade agreements. Vietnam is maybe a medium-sized country in terms of populations and GDP, but we are certainly a superpower in terms of free trade agreements participation. We've been a member of the IPEF. We have FTA with the European Unions, and you name it. What major economy out there we have a free trade agreements with, and we are building one with India. So that is to say that I think there is no contradiction between our oil and gas strategy and the broader economic strategies. And that is, I think we believe that one day if China accepts to abide by our law, we invite them to also come in and explore oil and gas in our water, abiding by our law.
Ambassador, your comments, please.
Relations between Russia and China. There is no doubt in the last couple of years, relations between Russia and China have gotten closer than in the past. What is the evidence for this? Their political leaders meet more often, number one. What they say about the West, there's more commonality, number two. Their trade has increased to $250 billion. For Russia, China is a very important trading partner, but that's true of many other countries. China is a very important partner for many other countries. In military terms, they're exercising more often at higher and higher levels of, in a sense, nuclear deterrence levels. So they are doing a lot of coordinated patrols and coordinated deterrence signaling that they're doing. They are not an alliance because an alliance requires two things: a mutual commitment to protect each other if there is a third country attack, or stationing of troops in each other's countries. The Russians and the Chinese are very far from that. But let us also not exaggerate this. China has been very careful in not supporting Russia when it needed support most in the Russia-Ukraine war. It has not given any armaments. It has given dual-use items. It has acted as a market, and as I tried to explain to you, the market dominance, it is trying to exploit Russian energy resources. Russia is very upset with the fact that China does not give it, it wants more and more concessions. Russian move to have good relations, in fact, deepen relations in the nuclear and military field with DPRK has not been welcomed by China. So there are these internal tensions that are there. But you see the comparison, the real problem for Russia vis-a-vis China is China's relations with Russia are completely different from China's relations with the United States and Europe. Russia's trade relations with China is $250 billion. China's trade relations with the United States is $750 billion, $800 billion. And if you add the EU, it's about $1.3 trillion. I mean, there is no comparison between the two. Whether it impacts on India, of course, it's a matter that we would like to watch very closely. As of now, there is no evidence to show that under Chinese pressure, Russians have done anything they wanted to do and did not do it under Chinese pressure. In fact, we all remember when the S-400 deal was negotiated, there was a very strong demand from China that they don't supply these advanced weapons to India. Russia went ahead and did that. But of course, this is a process that we would like to monitor and see. Russia would be a junior partner of China only it is very weak or it has lost the war in Ukraine. Presently, the answer, it is not losing the war. And I don't think Russian weakness will come to an extent where, it will be a junior partner of China. But for India, I think it's something that we need to watch out for. And the Russians should also know that for us, the Russia-China relationship is something that we would be of concern to us if it goes beyond a particular point. So on dealing with China, no, we are not alone in having this problem. The whole world has this problem. Now, every country also has its specificity. We have a particular problem with China and specificity because we have an undemarcated border where the Chinese are becoming more and more assertive in asserting their so-called rights. But the Chinese are also very good at reinterpreting rights. Our colleague from Vietnam just showed how their 9-dash line has become something else. China was, the People's Republic of China was formed in 1949. Chinese territorial expansion has been continuous since 1949. They took Tibet first, then they wanted different parts of India, Ladakh, Arunachal, and that thing continued. South China Sea. Now, like all big powers, China can also be stopped through a combination of measures. Firstly, it is firmness on part of neighboring countries. India has been very firm. In fact, India is one of the few countries which has actually stood up militarily to Chinese military assertion. I mean, you see the standoff that we have had with China. Vietnam is another good example. But it is not only military. It is also diplomatic. That we are open for dialogue, but the terms of the dialogue should be of ensuring security for both. Third is creating regional organization. I think if there is greater unity within ASEAN, there are greater solidarity within ASEAN, they'll be able to take on China in a constructive but firm manner. The Quad partnership is also not directed against China, but clearly we are strengthening the regional architecture for cooperation, which will help the countries of the region to address the China problem. And what is the China problem? The China problem is that they are extraordinarily powerful economically. They have a lot of money, and they are, in a sense, throwing it around and creating dependencies, which countries have a problem. Last point, I want to just address this issue our Japanese colleague asked on rule-based, rule of law and rules-based international order. Essentially, it is an Anglo-American construct, which makes a differentiation between law and legitimacy. So, American or Anglo-Saxon actions internationally don't have to be legal, but they can be legitimate. I mean, the Iraq invasion was one such example but that has been elevated to the principle of an international principle. Now, the key question is, we are not against a rules-based international order, but the key question is, what is the relation between a rules-based international order and international law? Because finally, that is where the ambiguity comes. Now, India has supported both. We would like this clarity to be taken forward. Now, in our public discourse, in our political discourse, like Japan uses it or India uses it, when we say a rules-based international order, we are in a sense pointing the finger at China. Expansion in the South China Sea, its inability to take into account the International Tribunal ruling, and its unilateral assertion in various domains of international public life. Now, if you ask me, this constant saying of rules-based international order, has it had any effect on China? I'm afraid the answer is no, because the Chinese are not in a mood to listen to just political exhortations. This is a political exhortation, not based entirely on law. Now, the problem is that if we branch out from international law, that space that opens up, we might be opening up inadvertently space for China also to exploit, to say that what is not based in international law is something that they can also do internationally on the basis of their own version of legitimacy. So let's see how this debate rolls out.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have unfortunately been given the signal, so apologies for those of you who still have a question with you. We can allow, the panel to come mingle with you if we have a little bit more time later. So individually, you can approach the speaker. I'm saying you can't go home today, right? But please hang around with the participant. But already we had an extended, Q&A today. And because of the robust discussion, so to speak, and back and forth, it's really beyond me to summarize, so to speak. So, I'm not going to have the 15-minute summary, but just quick sharing of, two quick takeaway I would like to share with you, just in case this is my last time in the IPRD, given a really bad job as a moderator this time around. First of all is that, we hear everybody talk about, the maritime challenges as a common one. And to this point, I agree with Ambassador that while the challenge is a common one, the consequence and the implication that is being felt by individual country is vastly different. And therefore, you see how countries and states respond rather differently. So that's my first point. Number two, my friends will know that, I'm a strong believer that power matters. And therefore, the fundamental reality and vulnerabilities for small states have not changed. So in my mind, small states can do very little to influence big power. But that's not to say that small states don't have agency. And this is what this panel, a key takeaway from this panel is that, we've heard how small states operationalize their agency either independently or through regional and international institutions and mechanisms, some with great success, some not so much. So, it provides, a lot of learning ground for us here, and a conference like IPRD provide that platforms for us to do that sharing. So with that, please join me in thanking the panel and to all of you who join us actively in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now request Vice Admiral Tarun Sopti, AVSM, VSM, the Deputy Chief of Naval Staff, to come up on stage and present tokens of our appreciation to the participants of this session. And may I respectfully ask the participants to come up and stand in front of the tables for the ceremony. We will have a group photograph shortly thereafter. Thank you, everyone. May I request you all to please resume your seats in the audience. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to now invite Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of the National Maritime Foundation, to provide a review and prognosis of this edition of the IPRD, to help us collectively reflect on its achievements as well as areas that would demand greater attention in its future editions. You have the floor.
Flag officers, officers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Now, I'm quite tempted to just launch into my conversation without telling you why I'm here. But it is necessary for me to be honest about this. And so if you looked at your program, we had a special address which was supposed to precede this particular session. And that special address was to be given by an intellect far greater than my own, namely Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. Regrettably, he had a personal emergency, and we kept waiting, hoping that the situation would be managed sufficiently for him to come and then deliver this special address. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be. So I thought I would share a few comments with you and some thoughts about the sessions that have been held. It is not my intention to go anywhere near doing a comprehensive review of what's happening. If Jane Chan couldn't do it, I certainly cannot. So there are a couple of points that were, however, raised in the last session that merit some more thinking. Also, there was one point that I thought needed to be highlighted. You know, when Dr. Krishnan gave his commentary, absolutely brilliant presentation for which many, many thanks. One of the things that struck me was that while we have a large amount of interest in international relations and geopolitics and this grand stuff, there was no ability to focus on the fact that in the case of fisheries, which we have already over the last 3 days said is a major issue in terms of the resource that we have, which drives geopolitics, but the fact that we just haven't got any idea about what is the stock. So we can only come to what is the maximum sustainable yield if we first find out what is the yield. And if we don't know what is the yield, then we leave ourselves open to every kind of charge, from the fact that you are overfishing, to the fact that you are underfishing, to the fact that you are not fishing at all. And therefore, the requirement for finding out solutions to how are we going to actually measure this stock better? Where is that push going to come from? You know, just to stay with Dr. Krishnan's expose, and I think it deserves this, where it's not just the Cod War. In 1995, the navies of Canada and Spain faced off with one another off Newfoundland, where a Canadian vessel, a Canadian patrol vessel, actually arrested a Spanish ship for having overfished inside the Canadian exclusive economic zone. The European Union's fishing commissioner of that period in 1995 made an amazing statement to say that this is organized piracy on the part of Spain. So there was much more emotion involved in that common sense, and certainly much less knowledge of the law than one would have expected. But my point was not to bring out either the competence or the incompetence of the individual involved, but to tell you that fishing and navies are very closely linked. And nations do, in fact, tend to be particularly possessive as stocks start to reduce. At one point in time, specific countries began to overfish the stocks available in the Mediterranean and in the North Atlantic. And then that led to a huge amount of movement of fishing vessels of those specific countries into the Indian Ocean, where all these small island development states, at that point in time, including large states, I dare say, also did not have sufficient capability. They had enough capacity. In many cases, the large states certainly had capacity, but not enough capability to understand how is a fishing contract to be read. Large states ended up allowing fishing vessels to operate under license in their exclusive economic zone based upon the belief that that fishing vessel would in fact transfer a certain amount of cash, if not catch, across to the state. And it is only after some years that those big nations realized that they were being taken for a complete ride. Surely, with the passage of 2 decades and a far brighter group of young people here than was the case in our time, we ought not to be repeating the same mistakes. And you will make the same mistakes if you don't know the history. And when you are subjected to information about the history, it doesn't fire your synapse to say, what about this and what should we do now? So it's a good thing to say, what should we do with China? It's also a good thing to say, what should we do about this fish? And BIMSTEC will either rise or fall as a function of how well we establish the regional fisheries management systems. It is central to the interests of all the countries, of all the 7 countries of BIMSTEC. So I thought I would just make a mention of that. And then Sensei Tokuchi already asked a really good question, and the ambassador gave an equally, I thought, brilliant response. But there are some things that I want to say to supplement also what was said by Admiral Rajkumar, and that is that many of you in this audience are going to leave thinking that UNCLOS is the only piece of international legislation that we need to worry about. So if you'd seen the sessional video, an attempt had been made to point out that UNCLOS is not the only piece of legislation. How many of the young students here, I don't need a hands up or anything like that, but this is just a rhetorical question. How many of you know that the IMO is, of course, an executive body? It has many committees, but the IMO is also a convention. It was signed and it was ratified, just like UNCLOS was. The IMO is not merely an organization. It draws its legitimacy from the fact that it is an international treaty. Who signed that treaty? We did. The world's entire responsible groupings of nations, practically everybody on the planet did. Did China? Yes. Then we went through a process of ratification. Did we ratify? Yes. Did the USA ratify? Yes. Did China ratify? Yes. Let me give you another one. The international regulations for the prevention of collisions at sea is what the Indian Navy understands as rules of the road. But the actual terminology in terms of its abbreviated form is COLREGS. Did you know that the international collision regulations, or the regulations for the prevention of collisions at sea, is not just a book that we have to cram up and study and become good naval officers with, or merchant marine mariners with. COLREGS is a convention. It was a treaty. It was signed by countries and then subject to ratification. It ratifies things. Did we sign on to the International Telecommunications Union? Yes. Does the International Telecommunications Union inform you that which is the frequency you're supposed to come up with if you suddenly come across another warship at sea? Yes. If you don't have VHF and you only have high frequency, does it tell you which frequency? Yes. If you don't have any radio, does it tell you which signals? Yes. If you don't speak English, does it give you standard communication phrases? Yes. Are these treaties? Yes. Did they get signed? Yes. Do we then need cues? No. Why are we not calling out China? Not for the things that it is doing currently under the DOC or the COC or cues, but simply why are we not calling out China to say, excuse me, you signed all these internationally, you ratified them internationally, this was your public ratification, and call them out for that. I think that that might make more, I personally think that it bears thinking about. But since we are We are keen to have these IPRD events because they throw up all these questions and they throw up all these doubts and all these things. Oh gosh, I better go back and Google it or whatever. So I think that I would like to say this much about the sessions. Now, as a predominantly maritime space, we are all aware, and for the last 3 days, we've been talking about the amount of resources that we have and that how varied they are and how abundant some are and how scarce others are. And these resources, of course, are not uniformly distributed across the region. So consequently, once human beings organize themselves into Westphalian states after the Peace of Westphalia, everybody got the same set of resources. Some people got more of one set and some people got more of another set and less of the first. And it would be nice, it would have been nice if all these resources had the same value. Then we could have gone into this wonderful comment that we can all trade these resources at a standardized value. But the truth is that not all these resources have the same value. That's not bad enough. Then they're not even distributed over time correctly. That means there is a temporal distribution as well. Let me give you an example of one of the slides that I think was put up when Dr. Hassan Kananje was giving his brilliant presentation as well. Yemen, you know about Yemen, and Yemen was spoken about by more than one person today, Sean Andrews, and there was this frankincense and myrrh. If you remember, frankincense was is the mixed with a variety of spices. It is the current ingredient, it is a current option of choice for utilization in medicine, in traditional medicine. What about myrrh, M-Y-R-R-H? Myrrh, similarly, who controlled these? Yemen, Oman. So when we were children, some of you will remember, of course I was a child 150 years ago, but some of you will remember that we played Queen of Sheba, and the Queen of Sheba wants. And has it ever occurred to anybody, where was Sheba? And Sheba was the Sabaean civilizational empire of Yemen. Therefore, at that point in time, frankincense and myrrh was what is currently oil and natural gas. It had the same clout, the same geopolitics associated with it. Empires fell and empires rose on these two accounts. But you don't like my story because we're going too far back in time. No, thank you very much. I want to go forward in time. So I want to ask you, are quantum mechanics and artificial intelligence resources that could shape future geopolitics? And if the answer is yes, and I rather think you would have a hard time disagreeing with me, that in the future at least, these are resources that they're going to be utilizing by human beings to shape geopolitics. But where is the material coming from for these quantum computers, for these, they're coming from rare earth elements, and therefore they're coming from the sea. So therefore, my next question is, are these marine resources or not? And therefore, is there a thing called marine resources which become maritime resources? Which leads you to a new question. Is there a difference between marine and maritime? And if so, what is it? So there is a host of intriguing questions. It, of course, is true about fish. We all know about this business of fish. But increasingly, when we talk about quantum computing, we talk about artificial intelligence, we are going to look at this bottom of the sea, the seabed. And today, we know more about the surface of Mars than we know about the seabed in our immediate vicinity. And yet, the mineral resources and the new age minerals and materials that are found there are going to drive our geopolitics. Now, India. Let me come to India. India was forced by the tyranny of a colonial yoke to miss the Industrial Revolution, and everybody here knows that. And I'm delighted to say that we have moved from that somewhat unhappy position to one in which we are actively engaged with the world's current sole hyperpower, the United States, for a series of critical and emerging technologies. And these critical and emerging technologies constitute the currency of contemporary and future geopolitical power. So if you guys in the audience, the young people in the audience, whom I'm really inspired by like everybody else, if you want to make an India that is a responsible regional power, then there's no use being us. We have brought India to where it is now. If we're happy with where it is now, let's go and watch Netflix. If we're not happy with where it is now, there's no use trying to get familiar only with the stuff that we know. These critical and emerging technologies need to be mastered. So there's no use doing an IR course in some really fancy university and then looking at anything that has to do with digits and saying, "Ye to bahut technical hai." This won't do anymore because that's the driver of geopolitics in the future. And so I think that it is going to be more and more necessary that we build UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles, yeah? And you can build them, and I can build them, and the Americans can build them, and the Singaporeans can certainly build them. Let's build it. What if we could say that we will build UUVs that will draw their electric power from hydrothermal vents on the seabed, huh? Suppose we could go and tell the world, "Hi, this is India. We have the richest source of hydrogen, or we have the richest source of non-conventional petroleum in the way of gas hydrates." And we could say, "I can go there and I can capture this gas hydrate, and no, I won't release the methane into the atmosphere." Then would we be a regional power worth being able to spread our regional ability to the region? I think so. And that is what we need to be able to do. So there are so many areas that we wanted to be able to explore and so little time in which to explore them all by ourselves. So that brings me to the prognosis part. The IPRD is an annually recurring conference, as you have all read about, and it's there in our concept note and everything else. So next year is going to be 2025. In 2025, the Indian Navy is going to move from 2024 strength to an order of magnitude superior to this strength, and it will run a 2025 Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue. And we hope that you will all be there as the NMF stands in solidarity with our Navy and is the knowledge partner for that. What should we then talk about? So in the 2025, the next pillar of the IPOI that we will tackle is the issue of capacity building, capability enhancement, and resource sharing. And so you have now 1 year of prep time, as do we all, to come here and ask even more brilliant questions, one after the other, of our even more brilliant interlocutors. So when will it be? I think it'll be in October sometime. We have to figure out the whole business of Thanksgiving in the USA, Diwali in India, Dasara, Bhai Dooj. And if we worry too much about these, we may never have one because we seem to have an awful lot of festivals taking place in the September, October, November, December period. But it will be in the in the last quarter of the next year. And this will be about, as I said, about the IPRD, the IPOI pillar or spoke of capability and capacity share and resource sharing. There is no single pillar that is not deeply connected to another pillar. You can't do any of this without academics. You can't do academics without security. You can't do security with, and so on and so forth. So if you thought that we had a decent enough session, then the way to express that is not by clapping or not clapping. I hope you clap. But it is by going back and saying, wow, that was a humdinger of an event. Let's come again next year. Then if we've given you, if the NMF, if the Indian Navy has managed to provide in each of your minds more than one, but hopefully many wow moments, then I think we have all succeeded. Thank you very much.
Sir, may I request you to remain on stage for a few moments longer? Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to have the opportunity to announce the signing of a memorandum of understanding between the National Maritime Foundation and the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, Kenya. Consequently, may I request Dr. Hassan Khanenje, Director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, to join Admiral Chauhan on stage for the MOU signing ceremony.
This is a singular privilege for the NMF, and you can see that we're now reaching out throughout the Indo-Pacific, not just looking in one particular direction, but we want to cross this road. So how do you cross the road? You look left, you look right. So we look east, we look west, we look north, we look south. Thank you so much for being our most valuable guide while we look west, and hopefully you look east.
Thank you, sir. May I request both of you to kindly remain on stage a few moments longer, as I now invite Mr. Hideshi Tokuchi on stage to release the last publication for this year's edition of the IPRD, entitled Viewing Maritime Activities Through a Legal Lens. This volume has been jointly edited and compiled by Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of the National Maritime Foundation, and Mr. John J. Vachaparambil, Associate Fellow at the National Maritime Foundation. So, Mr. John, I invite you on stage as well. This publication analyzes various facets of the concept of lawfare and its application by states and non-state actors. It also provides an insight into legal aspects on numerous activities in the maritime domain, while providing relevant policy recommendations. Thank you, sir. May I request everyone on stage to resume their seats in the audience? Thank you, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is with an abiding sense of honor that I invite Mr. Jaideep Mazumdar, Secretary East at the Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India, to kindly come up on stage to deliver the valedictory address. Mr. Mazumdar will be escorted on stage by Vice Admiral Krishna Swaminathan, Vice Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman of the National Maritime Foundation, and Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of the National Maritime Foundation. Sir, please. Sir, may I request you to join us on the podium and deliver the valedictory address?
A very good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be invited to deliver the valedictory address at the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue 2024. Thank you for giving me the last word on the subject. But before that, let me thank the National Maritime Foundation and the Indian Navy for organizing this dialogue and providing us all with this platform for meaningful engagement. As the 2024 edition of this dialogue draws to a close, I was struck by the richness of the perspectives and the quality of discussion that these views have engendered over the past 3 days. I thank all the participants for this. Thematically, this year's conference has great relevance for contemporary geopolitics, where resources and security in the Indo-Pacific have emerged at the center stage of global concerns. The presence of participants from the UK, France, and Germany is perhaps understandable, but the fact that we have participants from Prague and Venice, Copenhagen, and Haifa indicates that this is no longer a subject for regional dialogue alone. The Indo-Pacific is a global commons, and not least because it is for the foreseeable future the main growth engine of the world. I would like to take a moment to reflect on the insightful discussions that have taken place. Honorable Raksha Mantri articulated India's vision for the region through the Sagar initiative. He emphasized that India's maritime policy is anchored in the idea that security and prosperity are intertwined, not just for one nation, but for all nations of the Indo-Pacific. This set the tone for our dialogue, reinforcing the collective responsibility we share in ensuring the safety, stability, and prosperity of this vast and dynamic region. We also heard from the Chief of Defense Staff and the Chief of Naval Staff, who provided us with a comprehensive view of India's strategic approach to maritime security. Their remarks underscored India's role as a net security provider in the region and how India's efforts are helping to foster greater regional cooperation in addressing common maritime challenges. We had insightful discussions on the evolving geopolitical situation in the South China Sea. Dr. Hang Son from Vietnam shared the challenges posed by declining oil and gas reserves and increasing tensions with China. Similarly, Sumathi Permal from Malaysia spoke of the heightened lawfare activities aimed at expanding Chinese influence in the EEZ of other claimant nations. As 2024 has been particularly eventful in the region, she emphasized the importance of ASEAN reinvigorating its strategy ahead of Malaysia's ASEAN chairpersonship in 2025. From the Philippines, Professor Renato Castro, my old friend, provided an in-depth analysis of his country's comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, which aims to counter external pressures in the South China Sea. These discussions underscored the urgency of multilateral cooperation in managing the complex and contentious geopolitics of the region. One of the key themes throughout the dialogue was maritime security, and here we heard strong endorsements for greater regional cooperation. Japan's Professor Hideshi Tokuchi underscored the importance of maritime partnerships, particularly through platforms like the Quad and the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness. He highlighted the evolving defense ties between Japan and India, specifically in securing vital sea lines of communication. Jeffrey Payne from the United States added that resource competition in the Indo-Pacific requires like-minded nations to join forces to ensure that global commons remain open, secure, and governed by the rule of law. This emphasis on partnerships is reflected in the Quad's initiatives, which, he said, plays a crucial role in safeguarding the region's security architecture. The discussions around resource geopolitics and the blue economy was both thought-provoking and timely. Admiral Jayanta Pereira from Sri Lanka emphasized the need for sustainable practices in managing marine resources, especially in the context of the blue economy. Indonesia's Dr. Shafia Muhibat echoed this sentiment, noting that resource geopolitics will continue to be a key driver of Indonesia's maritime security strategy as competition for deep-sea resources intensifies. From Papua New Guinea, Commodore Peter Ilau stressed the potential of his country's maritime resources, calling for greater alignment with regional frameworks like SAGAR to promote shared prosperity. Sean Andrews from Australia added that resource scarcity poses a growing risk of instability, making regional collaboration in resource management a vital priority. We also discussed the emerging role of East Africa in the Indo-Pacific. Dr. Hassan Kananje from Kenya highlighted the region's untapped maritime resources and the growing interest they are attracting from global powers. Similarly, Dr. Tumaini Guromo from Tanzania spoke about the transformative potential of natural gas reserves in East Africa and their implications for global energy markets. As resource competition intensifies in the Indo-Pacific, the strategic importance of East Africa's maritime domain is becoming increasingly clear. Mr. Timothy Walker explored how South Africa has sought to leverage its strategic position, naval strength, and diplomatic influence to help steer the region and continent towards a safer, secure, and sustainable future. As we reflect on these rich discussions, it is important to reiterate India's steadfast commitment to the Indo-Pacific region. India's approach to the Indo-Pacific is built on the foundation of SAGAR and articulated in Prime Minister Modi's vision for a free, open, inclusive, and rules-based maritime domain. The Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative and its 7 pillars, maritime security, ecology, resources, capacity building, disaster risk reduction, science and technology, and trade connectivity, provides a non-treaty-based inclusive framework for regional cooperation. Through this initiative, India aims to foster a cooperative, inclusive, and rules-based order in the region. India's leadership in the IPOI is complemented by partnerships with like-minded countries across the Indo-Pacific, including ASEAN, FIPIC, the Quad, and IURA. The elevation of ASEAN-India relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership and the first ever India-ASEAN maritime exercise are clear testaments to this growing cooperation and India's deep engagement in the region. Additionally, the Information Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean region serves as a vital hub for maritime information sharing, addressing security challenges across the Indo-Pacific. India's efforts through the IFC-IOR are aimed at ensuring regional stability and open seas. From wherever in the region or outside you look at it, we arrive at the following truths. The Indo-Pacific is a global commons, yet it is also an area of great power contestation. What is required is recognition of certain principles. 1, security and growth has to be for all in the region. 2, there has to be trust and common understandings among all players. And for 1 and 2 to happen, a third condition that there has to be adherence by all to a rules-based order. As I have said at the beginning, the littoral of the Indo-Pacific is for the foreseeable future the engine of growth for the global economy. It is important that it does not become the region of contestation. For that to happen, what is needed is trust and cooperation. and trust and cooperation can only come about from common understandings of the rules. If one or a few actors do not believe in the legitimacy of the rules, what do we do? Perhaps that could be the subject of our next regional dialogue. I thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, sir. With that, may I request Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman of the NMF, to present a token of our gratitude and appreciation to Mr. Majumdar. May I request all dignitaries on stage to step in front of the tables for the ceremony, and we will have a group photograph shortly thereafter. Thank you, sir. May I request everyone on stage to resume their seats in the audience? Thank you, sir. And with that, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached a seminal point as I invite Commodore Manish Sinha, Executive Director of the National Maritime Foundation, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Admiral Karambir Singh, former Chief of the Naval Staff and incumbent Chairman NMF, Vice Admiral Krishna Swaminathan, Vice Chief of the Naval Staff, Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General NMF, Mr. Jaideep Majumdar, Secretary East, Vice Admiral Tarun Sopti, Deputy Chief of the Naval Staff, flag officers, members of the diplomatic community, distinguished speakers and moderators, special invitees, men and women in uniform and veterans present today, friends from the media and fellow think tanks, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The vote of thanks each year falls within the remit of the Executive Director NMF, and this year it is my turn to follow in the wake of brilliant minds whose works continue to be essential reading for many of us. So I will keep it simple. As this edition of the IPRD 2024 draws to an end, we have witnessed a great depth of deliberation and diversity of insight over the past 3 days. Discussions have only underscored the significance of the Indo-Pacific as a region where interests converge and diverge around resources that have become critical to prosperity. Resource geopolitics, to me, goes a bit beyond the linear dilemmas of access and control, since the region lacks a coherent identity of its own and consequently a workable model for collective problem solving. This is a work in progress for all of us. Economies demand unimpeded commerce, and when this is affected by disrupted supply chains, as well as maritime cartographic aggression, security challenges are not too far behind. Environmental sustainability also presents an inflection point for growing economies as they seek to balance consumption with conservation. Technology, like always, is playing a transformative role, and the future of AI is poised to reduce the unknown unknowns when searching for resources. As planners, we follow an important dictum. Plans must be both operationally feasible and logistically sustainable. In this auditorium, you have seen the operationally feasible part on stage as the professional segment, and I would be remiss in not acknowledging the people who have worked tirelessly to provide our guest speakers a comfortable stay and you in the audience an enriching experience. The NMF, as India's leading think tank dealing with matters maritime, is indeed proud to be the Navy's knowledge partner, and we would like to thank the senior leadership of the Indian Navy for the encouragement provided to us by way of freedom of thought as well as action. We express our deep gratitude to the Personnel Branch, Naval Headquarters, with special mention to the Directorates of Naval Training and Directorate of Administration. We would also like to thank Manekshaw Center, and in particular INS India, who is not just our home base, but also the NMF's landlord. The IPRD, you don't mess with the landlord. The IPRD is an integral part of the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, and led by Sri Jaideep Mazumdar, Secretary East, the Ministry of External Affairs plays an important role in our endeavors as the MEA's knowledge partner for the IPOI. Thank you for your support, sir. Next, I would like to thank you, the audience, for making the IPRD such a success. The enthusiastic response from students in particular, again, is a positive sign as we seek to increase maritime consciousness in India. You are the future, and to you, I say, if you want to help in India's journey to become a developed country, come intern with us for a start. We run a carefully crafted world-class education and empowerment program that encourages critical thinking and provides the tools to possibly become a better version of yourself. We have heard from a stellar array of guest speakers and moderators. We are truly obliged to you, the friends of the NMF, that you have taken time out of your hectic schedules to come and enrich us with your perspectives. Many problem statements for joint projects will surely come out of these 3 days for us to take forward. Finally, I would like to thank the entire IPRD team, particularly the administrative staff, ushering team, and our young research faculty and interns. We couldn't be more proud of you for going above and beyond in planning and executing the IPRD 2024. This is one ship's company that it continues to be a privilege to lead and serve with. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please give them a round of applause? If some of them look like they're ready to collapse, they actually are. They've not slept for the last week. So we are finished with main engines for the IPRD 2024. Thank you. See you again next year. Jai Hind.